There are places where the tools we trust simply stop working. Gifford Pinchot National Forest sprawls across nearly 1 million acres of southern Washington state, a wilderness of volcanic ridges, ancient Douglas fir, and valleys carved by glacial melt 10,000 years ago. It sits in the shadow of Mount St. Helens, which erupted catastrophically in 1980, reshaping the land and leaving behind a legacy of ash, silence, and slow recovery. The forest is managed, mapped, and monitored. Crews walk its trails. Rangers mark its boundaries. Scientists study its ecology. It is, by most accounts, well understood. But in the summer of 1987, near a place locals called Dark Meadow, a low basin northeast of the Cispus River where fog settles heavy and morning light arrives late, a Forest Service trail maintenance crew found something that should not exist. They were clearing deadfall from an access route used primarily by fire lookouts and research teams. The area was remote, but not unmapped. It had been surveyed multiple times since the early 1960s. The crew consisted of 4 men: Daniel Pritchard, the crew lead, along with Miguel Ortega, Evan Holloway, and a seasonal hire named Kyle Amundsen. They had been working the route for 3 days without incident. On the morning of July 9th, Pritchard noticed something unusual about the terrain ahead. A circular clearing, roughly 40 feet in diameter, sat just off the trail. It was not marked on their maps. The ground inside was bare. No undergrowth, no saplings, no moss. Just soil and scattered stones. The crew assumed it was a result of the eruption, perhaps a pocket of superheated gas that had scorched the earth years before. They stepped inside to inspect it. That was when Ortega's compass began to spin. He had been using it to verify their position before radioing back to the ranger station. The needle turned slowly at first, then faster, rotating counterclockwise in smooth, unbroken circles. He tapped the casing. The spinning continued. Holloway pulled out his own compass. The same thing happened. Pritchard tried his. Same result. All 3 compasses spun in perfect counterclockwise motion, as if magnetism itself had reversed inside the clearing. They stepped back outside the circle. The compasses stopped. The needles settled, pointing north as they should. They stepped back in. The spinning resumed. Pritchard marked the location with flagging tape and reported it that evening. Within a week, a geological survey team arrived from the University of Washington. They brought magnetometers, GPS units, and soil sampling equipment. What they found defied their instruments. The boundary of the anomaly was precise, exactly 40 feet in diameter, measured from center to edge. Inside that circle, magnetic north did not exist. Compasses spun, but not randomly. They rotated at a consistent speed, always counterclockwise, always smooth. Just outside the boundary, everything functioned normally. There was no gradient, no transitional zone. It was as if an invisible line had been drawn in the earth, and the rules of physics bent along it. Dr. Laura Ingen, a geophysicist who led the initial survey, described the site in her field notes as geologically incongruent. The soil showed no traces of volcanic activity, no ferrous deposits, no basaltic intrusions that might explain localized magnetic interference. Core samples revealed standard forest topsoil layered over glacial till, no different from the surrounding area. The clearing itself was not anomalous in composition, only in effect. We tested for underground water flow, mineral concentrations, even residual radiation from the eruption. Ingen later told a journalist from the Oregonian in 1991, there was nothing. The compasses spun because something about that space disrupted magnetic orientation, but we couldn't identify a source. It wasn't there. It just happened. The Forest Service quietly restricted access to the area. No signs were posted, no warnings were issued. The trail remained open, but the clearing was marked only on internal maps used by rangers and research teams. Over the following months, Others visited the site. A forest ecologist from Portland State University confirmed the findings. A team from the U.S. Geological Survey spent 2 days running tests and left without issuing a report. By 1988, the clearing had become a footnote in regional documentation, mentioned briefly in internal memos, referenced occasionally by field crews, but otherwise ignored. Ranger Colleen Marbury, stationed at the nearby Randall office, visited the site 11 times between 1989 and 1993. She kept informal notes, not part of any official record, simply observations made during routine patrols. "You feel it before you see it," she wrote in a journal entry dated October 1990. "Not the compass thing, that's just strange, but the air. It's heavier there. Sound doesn't carry the same way. I've stood in that clearing and shouted, and it feels like the noise stops at the edge. I don't know how else to describe it." Other rangers reported similar impressions: a sense of isolation, a subtle pressure like standing at high altitude, even though the elevation was unremarkable. Some mentioned that wildlife avoided the clearing. Deer trails curved around it. Birds flew over, but rarely landed inside. Insects were scarce. One ranger noted that snow accumulated differently in winter, melting faster inside the circle than outside, even when temperatures were uniform. None of these observations were officially documented. They existed only in personal logs, shared between colleagues during shift changes or mentioned in passing during training sessions. The Forest Service conducted no follow-up studies. When asked, regional coordinators described the clearing as an unexplained magnetic anomaly and offered no further comment. In 2003, a documentary filmmaker named Aaron Kellis visited the site with a small crew. He had read about the clearing in an obscure ecology journal and wanted to include it in a project about environmental mysteries in the Pacific Northwest. He brought GPS equipment, video cameras, and a geologist consultant named Dr. Raymond Falk. Falk confirmed the effect. The compasses spun, the boundary held, but what struck him most was the consistency. "Magnetic anomalies aren't unusual," Falk explained in the footage. "You find them near fault lines, volcanic deposits, certain mineral formations. But they're chaotic, irregular. This was uniform, precise. That's what made it strange. It wasn't behaving like a natural phenomenon. It was behaving like, I don't know, like something designed." Kellis's documentary was never completed. Funding fell through. The footage remained unreleased. But copies circulated among researchers, and the clearing gained a quiet reputation in academic circles, a puzzle without a solution, a location that existed but could not be explained. In 2011, a group of engineering students from Oregon State University visited the site as part of a thesis project on geomagnetic irregularities. They mapped the clearing using drone-mounted sensors and found that the effect extended vertically. Compasses spun at ground level, at 10 feet, at 30 feet, all the way up to the tree canopy. The anomaly was not limited to the surface. It was a column. Their findings were published in a minor journal. The paper received little attention. The clearing remained as it had always been, documented, studied, unresolved. As of this writing, the clearing near Dark Meadow still exists. Rangers occasionally visit. Researchers make the trip when funding permits. The compasses still spin. The boundary still holds. No explanation has ever been officially accepted. The Forest Service maintains the site as part of its standard inventory, but does not advertise its location. There are no markers, no interpretive signs, no acknowledgement in public records. It simply exists, cataloged and unexplained, a 40-foot circle where the world's oldest navigational tool becomes meaningless. And in the quiet of that place where fog rolls slow through the trees and the earth remembers nothing it will share, the question remains, not what caused it, but why it has never changed. Sometimes time doesn't pass the way it should. Taklach Lach sits at an elevation of 4,600 feet in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, roughly 14 miles northwest of Mount Adams. The lake itself is small, barely a quarter mile across, formed in a shallow volcanic basin during the last glacial period. The water is cold and clear, fed by snowmelt that lingers into July. On calm days, the surface reflects the peak of Mount Adams with such precision that photographs often require a second look to distinguish sky from water. The trail that circles the lake is classified as easy. 2 miles total, well maintained, popular with families and photographers. Forest Service records show steady use throughout the spring and summer months, with no significant incidents reported in the decade leading up to 2003. It is, by all measures, an unremarkable destination. Scenic, accessible, safe. On the afternoon of June 14, 2003, 3 hikers arrived at the Taklach Lake Trailhead. Jessica Brennan, a graphic designer from Portland, her partner, Michael Ruiz, a high school biology teacher, and their friend, Kara Lindstrom, a nurse who had moved to Oregon from Minnesota 2 years prior. They had driven up from Portland that morning, planning a short hike before heading to a campground near Trout Lake for the weekend. Brennan logged their arrival in a small notebook she kept for tracking hikes. The time, 2:47 p.m. She photographed the trailhead sign with her digital camera. The timestamp on the image file reads 14:47 hours, 2:47 p.m. They started the loop clockwise, moving at a leisurely pace. The weather was clear, temperature in the low 70s, no wind. Ruiz later described the conditions as perfect, the kind of day you don't think about, you just enjoy. The trail follows the shoreline closely, winding through patches of lodgepole pine and mountain hemlock. Wildflowers were in bloom: lupine, paintbrush, avalanche lilies. The 3 stopped frequently to take photos. Brennan's camera recorded 18 images during the hike: the lake, the mountain, close-ups of flowers, a shot of Lindstrom kneeling near the water's edge. They spoke casually, discussed dinner plans, pointed out birds. Lindstrom mentioned feeling thirsty and drank from her water bottle. Ruiz checked his watch at one point and commented that they were making good time. None of them reported anything unusual. No strange sounds, no disorientation, no sense that anything was wrong. According to their recollection, they completed the loop and returned to the trailhead around 4:30 p.m. The sun was still high. The parking area looked exactly as they had left it. Brennan's car, a blue Honda Civic, sat alone near the entrance. They loaded their gear, climbed in, and prepared to leave. Ruiz turned the key. The dashboard clock read 11:53 p.m. He assumed the clock was broken. Brennan checked her. Watch in 11:53. Lindstrom pulled out her phone. Same time. Ruiz's phone confirmed it. The digital camera's internal clock, 23:53 hours. 11:53 p.m. The sun was still visible above the ridge to the west. Daylight, unmistakable and warm, surrounded them. But every device they carried insisted it was nearly midnight. Brennan scrolled through the photos on her camera. The first image at the trailhead, 2:47 p.m. The last image, taken near the end of the loop, 11:41 p.m. 18 photos spanning nearly 9 hours, all taken during what felt like 90 minutes of afternoon light. They sat in the car for several minutes, trying to make sense of it. Ruiz suggested they drive to the nearest ranger station. Lindstrom checked her phone for signal. None. Brennan looked at the sky. The light hadn't changed. It was still afternoon, still bright, still exactly as it should be for late June at this elevation. They drove down the forest road toward Trout Lake. The clock in the car continued to display midnight, then passed it. By the time they reached the campground, it was 12:37 a.m., according to every device they owned. But the sun had only just begun to set. At the campground, they asked other campers for the time. Everyone confirmed. It was after midnight. One couple showed them a newspaper dated June 15th. Another camper's watch matched theirs. The consensus was clear. It was early morning on the 15th. They had been on the trail for over 9 hours, but none of them remembered it that way. "We didn't feel tired," Lindstrom said in a written statement she provided to a journalist in 2005. "That's what bothered me most. If we'd really been hiking for 9 hours, we would have been exhausted. We would have run out of water. We would have noticed the light changing. But we felt fine. We felt like we'd been out there for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. That's it." Ruiz described the experience as impossibly normal. He remembered every part of the hike, the conversations, the places they stopped, the photos they took. There were no gaps, no blank spaces, no moments of confusion or lost time. It was a continuous, unremarkable experience, except that it had somehow occupied 9 hours instead of 90 minutes. Brennan noted that her camera's battery was nearly dead when they returned to the car. She had charged it fully that morning. Under normal use, the battery lasted several days. "I took 18 pictures," she said. "That's nothing, but the battery indicator showed less than 10%, like the camera had been running for hours." They reported the incident to the Forest Service the following Monday. A ranger at the Cowlitz Valley Station took their statement but offered no explanation. He mentioned that time perception could be affected by altitude, dehydration, or fatigue, but acknowledged that those factors didn't match what the three had described. He filed a report and suggested they follow up with a doctor if they had any lingering health concerns. No follow-up was conducted. No investigation was opened. The Forest Service logged the incident as an equipment malfunction, multiple devices displaying incorrect times due to user error or technical failure. The report concluded that the hikers had likely started their hike earlier than they remembered and spent more time on the trail than they realized. But the timestamps on Brennan's camera contradicted that explanation. The photos were sequential with metadata that showed exact times and dates. The first photo, 2:47 p.m. The last photo, 11:41 p.m. The interval was clear. The camera had recorded 9 hours. The hikers had experienced 90 minutes. Dr. Elliot Rasmussen, a cognitive psychologist at the University of Washington, reviewed the incident in 2007 as part of a broader study on memory and time perception in wilderness settings. He examined the camera files, the written statements, and the Forest Service report. "There's no medical or psychological explanation that fits," Rasmussen said in an interview. "Dissociative states, time distortion due to stress or monotony, those can make time feel longer or shorter than it was. But they don't change clocks. They don't alter digital timestamps. This wasn't a perceptual issue. Something happened to the elapsed time itself or to every device they carried, and I don't know which possibility is more troubling." Rasmussen contacted the National Institute of Standards and Technology to inquire whether localized electromagnetic interference could cause multiple electronic devices to malfunction simultaneously. The response he received indicated that such an event was theoretically possible near powerful radio transmitters or during geomagnetic storms, but no such conditions were present in the area on June 14, 2003. Weather records showed calm, stable conditions. No solar activity, no seismic events, no military operations or experimental testing in the region. The Forest Service did not pursue additional investigation. Internal memos obtained through a public records request in 2012 show that the incident was categorized as low priority and likely resolved. No subsequent reports of similar occurrences at Taklock Lake were filed. Brennan, Ruiz, and Lindstrom returned to the trailhead once, in August of 2004. They hiked the loop again, carrying multiple watches, 2 cameras, and a GPS unit. The hike took 1 hour and 42 minutes. All devices agreed. The timestamps matched. Everything functioned normally. They never went back after that. The trail remains open. Taklock Lake continues to draw visitors each summer. The Forest Service maintains the site as part of its standard rotation. No warnings are posted. No markers indicate that anything unusual ever occurred there. And on quiet afternoons, when the light holds steady and the mountain reflects perfectly in the still water, hikers complete the loop in 90 minutes, check their watches, and drive away without question. never knowing that once, on a day indistinguishable from any other, 3 people walked the same path and lost 7 hours they never felt pass. Some sounds should not exist in empty places. Council Bluff rises along the eastern boundary of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, a sharp ridge of columnar basalt that juts nearly 300 feet above the surrounding terrain. The formation dates back roughly 2 million years, the result of lava flows that cooled slowly enough to fracture into geometric pillars, hexagonal in cross-section, stacked like organ pipes. Geologically, it resembles similar formations found along the Columbia River Gorge, though smaller and less accessible. The Forest Service maintains a primitive trail to the base of the bluff, but the route is steep, unmarked beyond the first half-mile, and rarely used outside hunting season. The area has no history of settlement, no logging operations, no mining claims. Indigenous groups from the region, primarily Cowlitz and Yakima, used the surrounding lowlands for seasonal hunting but avoided the bluff itself. Oral histories passed down through Cowlitz families describe the ridge as a place where voices carried strangely, where echoes returned distorted or not at all. Elders discouraged overnight stays near the formation, though the reasons given varied. Some cited poor hunting, others mentioned restless sleep or unease that had no clear source. Modern interest in Council Bluff began in October of 1998, when a solo backpacker named Thomas Gallagher reported hearing what he described as a hum deep and constant, like a power line but musical, while camped near the base of the formation. Gallagher, a software engineer from Seattle, had arrived late in the afternoon on October 9th and set up camp in a clearing roughly 200 yards from the bluff. He woke at 3:14 a.m. to the sound. In his written account, submitted to a hiking forum in early November, Gallagher described the noise as not loud but penetrating, something you felt as much as heard. He initially assumed it was wind moving through the basalt columns, a natural organ pipe effect. But the air was still, no breeze, no rustling in the trees. The sound continued for what he estimated to be 30 to 40 minutes, then stopped abruptly at 4 a.m. He recorded a brief audio sample on a handheld voice recorder he had brought for trail notes. The recording, later shared online, captured a low-frequency hum with a rhythmic quality, rising and falling in slow, regular intervals. Gallagher returned home the following day and posted about the experience, attributing it to some acoustic quirk of the landscape. The thread received little attention until October of 1999, when another hiker, a woman named Alicia Voss, replied with her own account. She had camped at Council Bluff on October 16th of that same year and heard an identical sound, same time window, same tonal quality, same abrupt cessation near 4 a.m. She had not brought recording equipment but described the experience in similar terms, a hum that seemed to originate from the basalt itself, low and organized, almost musical. By October of 2000, 4 separate individuals had reported the phenomenon. All described hearing it between 3 and 4 a.m. All camped in October. None heard it during daylight hours or in any other month. The sound was consistent enough that a small group of amateur researchers began planning a coordinated observation. On the night of October 12, 2001, 6 people gathered near Council Bluff with recording equipment, seismographs, and handheld instruments for measuring wind speed and temperature. The group included Gallagher Voss, 2 geology students from Western Washington University named Marcus Delgado and Priya Kaur, a retired Forest Service ranger named Donald Mercer, and a sound engineer from Portland named Grace Ito. They positioned themselves at intervals along the base of the bluff, each equipped with audio recorders and synchronized watches. The night was cold and clear, no wind, no precipitation. Visibility was excellent under a waning moon. At 3:07 a.m., the sound began. All 6 individuals heard it. All 6 recorders captured it. Delgado, who had set up a basic seismograph, detected low-frequency vibrations correlating with the audible hum. The sound lasted 41 minutes and stopped at 3:48 a.m. Ito later analyzed the recordings using spectral analysis software. The sound consisted of multiple overlapping tones, primarily in the range of 30 to 60 hertz, low enough to be felt physically but well within the range of human hearing. The tones were organized, not random. They followed a pattern, a primary frequency with harmonic overtones that shifted in predictable intervals, creating a rhythmic, almost melodic quality. It wasn't chaotic, Ito said in an interview conducted for a podcast in 2006. Natural sounds, wind, water, animal calls, they have irregular patterns. This was structured. The intervals were consistent. If I didn't know where it came from, I'd say it was synthesized. Delgado's seismograph data showed that the vibrations originated from within the basalt formation itself. The readings were faint but measurable, consistent with the hypothesis that the columns were resonating at specific frequencies. However, no mechanism for generating that resonance was identified. There was no seismic activity in the region, no underground water flow, no temperature fluctuations or barometric changes that might cause the rock to expand, contract, or vibrate. Core proposed that wind, even imperceptible wind, might be moving through cracks or voids in the basalt, creating a natural organ effect. But anemometer readings taken throughout the night showed wind speeds consistently below 1 mile per hour, too low to generate audible sound through any known acoustic process. The group submitted their findings to the University of Washington's Earth and Space Sciences Department in early 2002. A faculty member, Dr. Leonard Strand, reviewed the recordings and data and agreed to visit the site in October of that year. He brought additional equipment, more sensitive seismographs, infrasound detectors, and thermal imaging cameras to rule out temperature-related expansion. On October 19, 2002, Strand and 2 graduate assistants camped at Council Bluff. The sound occurred as expected, beginning at 3:11 a.m. and ending at 3:54 a.m. Strand's equipment confirmed the earlier findings. The sound was real. The vibrations were detectable. The basalt was resonating. But no external force, wind, water, seismic tremor, could be identified as the cause. "It's resonating," Strand said in a departmental seminar in November of 2002, audio from which was later posted online by an attendee. But resonance requires energy input. Something has to initiate it. We couldn't find that something. The formation is just humming on its own for 40 to 50 minutes, every October, between 3 and 4 a.m., and then it stops. Strand submitted a preliminary report but declined to publish formally. He noted in private correspondence with Ito that without a clear mechanism, the findings would be dismissed as instrumentation error or observer bias. The phenomenon was documented, but it was not understood, and without understanding, it could not be explained. The Forest Service was notified of the observations in 2003. A regional officer acknowledged receipt of the report and stated that no action would be taken unless the site posed a public safety risk. No follow-up investigation was conducted. No warnings were posted. The trail to Council Bluff remained as it had always been, unmarked, unmaintained, seldom visited. In 2008, a documentary crew from a cable network focusing on unexplained phenomena attempted to film the event. They arrived on October 10th with sound recording equipment, cameras, and a consulting geophysicist. The sound occurred. It was recorded. The footage aired as part of a special on natural mysteries, but received little critical attention. Over the following years, word spread among hikers and amateur researchers. Each October, small groups visited Council Bluff, hoping to hear the stones. Most succeeded. The sound was reliable. It occurred within the same time window, exhibited the same tonal characteristics, and stopped with the same abruptness. Online forums dedicated to the phenomenon accumulated dozens of recordings, all remarkably similar. Yet no academic institution pursued the matter further. Strand retired in 2013 without publishing his findings. Ito moved to California and stopped responding to inquiries about the recordings. Delgado and Kaur completed their degrees and took positions in unrelated fields. The phenomenon remained documented but unexamined, logged in forums, mentioned in podcasts, known to a small circle of enthusiasts, but ignored by mainstream science. In 2019, a research team from Portland State University proposed a study to determine whether the basalt's crystalline structure might allow for piezoelectric resonance, a process by which mechanical stress generates electrical charge, potentially causing vibration. Funding was not approved. The proposal was archived. As of this writing, the stones at Council Bluff continue to hum each October between 3 and 4 a.m. for reasons no one has conclusively explained. Hikers still camp near the formation. Recordings still accumulate. The sound remains consistent, low, rhythmic, organized, a pattern without a source, a resonance without a cause. And in the cold hours before dawn, when the forest holds its breath and the basalt begins to sing, the only certainty is that something in the stone remembers how to make that sound, even if no one can say why. There are moments when proof becomes more troubling than the mystery itself. The Boundary Trail runs for more than 30 miles through the remote eastern section of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, tracing the ridgeline that separates Washington State from the Mount Adams Wilderness. The trail sits above 5,000 feet for much of its length, exposed to weather and accessible only from late June through October in most years. Snow arrives early and lingers. Visibility can drop to nothing in minutes. The Forest Service classifies it as difficult, steep grades, limited water sources, no cell coverage, and minimal traffic even during peak season. Historically, the trail saw more use. In the 1960s and 70s, hunters and fire lookouts traveled it regularly. But budget cuts in the 80s reduced maintenance, and by the 1990s, much of the route had degraded into little more than a suggestion through the brush. Recent restoration efforts have improved access, but the trail remains isolated. Hikers who attempt it typically do so in groups. Solo travel is discouraged. On the morning of October 6, 2011, a 32-year-old geologist named Dr. Naomi Kirkland began a 3-day solo backpacking trip along the Boundary Trail. She started at the southern trailhead near Bird Creek Meadows, planning to hike north to Road 23. Kirkland had extensive backcountry experience. She had worked for the U.S. Geological Survey for 6 years and spent multiple field seasons in Alaska and the Cascades. She carried a GPS unit, a satellite phone, a digital camera, and standard wilderness gear. Weather forecasts called for clear skies with a chance of snow at higher elevations. Kirkland anticipated this and planned accordingly. She logged her itinerary with the ranger station at Trout Lake and began hiking at 7:30 a.m. By midday, light snow had begun to fall. Not heavy, but persistent. Kirkland continued north, reaching a point roughly 8 miles from the trailhead by early afternoon. The trail here follows a narrow ridge with steep drop-offs on both sides. Visibility was reduced but manageable. The snow accumulated slowly, an inch, perhaps 2, over the course of the afternoon. At approximately 3:20 p.m., Kirkland stopped to photograph the landscape. She took several shots of the ridge, the distant peak of Mount Adams, and the trail ahead. Then, out of habit, she turned and photographed the trail behind her. When she reviewed the image on her camera's display screen, she saw her own boot prints in the snow. That was expected. What was not expected was a second set of prints, identical in size and tread pattern, running parallel to hers, but offset by roughly 3 feet to the left. She looked back at the trail. The prints were there, 2 sets, both fresh, both hers. Kirkland later described her initial reaction as confusion rather than fear. She assumed she had somehow walked the trail twice, without realizing it, perhaps circling back after adjusting her pack or investigating something off-trail. But she had no memory of doing so, and the prints were not overlapping or erratic. They were parallel, deliberate. They followed the exact line of the trail, just as her own did. She walked back along the trail, following both sets of prints. They extended behind her for as far as she could see through the snow. Same boot, same stride length, same depth. One set she knew she had made. The other was identical but should not exist. She took more photographs, close-ups of the tread patterns, wide shots showing both sets of prints running side by side. She measured the distance between them, 2 feet 11 inches, consistent for at least 50 yards. She checked her GPS. Her track log showed a single, continuous line. No loops, no doubling back. Kirkland continued north, now walking more slowly, stopping frequently to look behind her. The second set of prints continued to appear. As she moved forward, making fresh tracks in the snow, a duplicate set formed alongside them. Not ahead, not behind, alongside. As if someone or something was walking the trail with her, matching her pace and gait exactly, but invisible. She stopped. The prints behind her stopped at the same point. She resumed walking. The duplicate prints resumed. She changed her stride deliberately, taking shorter steps. The duplicate prints adjusted. She walked to the very edge of the trail, close to the drop-off. The duplicate prints moved to the edge as well, maintaining the same offset distance. At 4:15 p.m., Kirkland used her satellite phone to call the ranger station. She spoke with Ranger Thomas Adeyemi, explaining what she was seeing. Adeyemi asked if she felt unsafe or disoriented. Kirkland said no, she felt clear-headed, calm, and certain of what she was observing. Adeyemi advised her to continue to the next established campsite, roughly 2 miles ahead, and to call again if the situation changed. She reached the campsite at 5:30 p.m., just before dusk. The snow had stopped. The duplicate prints had continued the entire way. She photographed them again, then set up her tent and prepared to wait out the night. The next morning, the snow had melted. The prints were gone. Kirkland packed up and continued north, completing the remaining section of trail without incident. She returned home on October 9th and downloaded the photographs from her camera. The images were clear. Both sets of prints were visible. The tread patterns were identical. She sent the photos to a colleague at the USGS, Dr. Raymond Thorne, along with a written summary of the event. Thorne examined the images and confirmed that the tread patterns matched. He noted that the depth and spacing of the prints suggested equal weight distribution. Both sets appeared to have been made by an adult human walking at a normal pace. "There's no indication of tampering," Thorne said in an email dated October 12, 2011. "The metadata is intact. The images weren't edited. What I can't explain is how 2 identical sets of prints were made simultaneously." If someone else had been walking with you, wearing identical boots, you would have seen them. If you had walked the trail twice, your GPS would show it. I don't have an answer. Kirkland contacted the Forest Service and offered to meet with rangers to discuss the incident. A meeting was scheduled for November 3rd at the Trout Lake Station. Kirkland attended, along with Adeyemi and 2 other Forest Service personnel. She presented her photographs, her GPS log, and her written account. The Forest Service reviewed the materials but declined to open an official investigation. A memo dated November 8th, obtained through a public records request in 2016, stated that the incident was likely the result of environmental factors creating an optical illusion in snow cover, and that no actionable evidence of anomalous activity was found. Kirkland disagreed with this assessment. In a blog post published in December of 2011, she wrote, "I know what I saw. I documented it. The prints were real. They existed in physical space. They were not an illusion. I'm not asking anyone to believe something impossible. I'm asking why 2 sets of identical prints appeared when only one person was walking." The post attracted some attention in online hiking communities. Several commenters suggested explanations. Wind patterns creating false impressions in snow, a psychological phenomenon known as doubling, or the possibility that another hiker with identical boots had walked the trail shortly before Kirkland. But none of these explanations held up under scrutiny. Wind does not create boot prints. Psychological doubling affects perception, not physical evidence. And the odds of another solo hiker wearing identical boots walking the exact same section of trail at the exact same time in weather that limited visibility to a few dozen yards were vanishingly small. A professor of cognitive psychology at Oregon State University, Dr. Leah Brunel, reviewed the case in 2013. She examined the photographs and Kirkland's account and concluded that the prints were not a perceptual error. Dr. Kirkland documented physical evidence, Brunel said in an interview. The prints existed. They were photographed from multiple angles. The question isn't whether she saw them, she clearly did. The question is how they got there, and I don't have an answer to that. No further investigation was conducted by any official body. Kirkland attempted the Boundary Trail again in October of 2012, this time with a hiking partner. They encountered no anomalies. The trail was clear. No duplicate prints appeared. She has not returned since. The photographs remain. They have been analyzed, discussed, and shared across various platforms. The metadata confirms the terms: date, time, and location. The prints are visible, consistent, and unexplained. Kirkland's GPS log shows a single track. Her satellite phone records confirm she was alone. Every piece of evidence supports her account, and yet the second set of prints existed. In the years since, a handful of other hikers have reported similar experiences on remote trails, always in snow, always brief, always unexplained. None have provided photographic evidence as clear as Kirkland's. The phenomenon, if it can be called that, remains isolated to a few scattered reports, easily dismissed as coincidence or misperception. But on the Boundary Trail on the afternoon of October 6, 2011, something walked alongside Dr. Naomi Kirkland. It matched her stride. It left identical prints. It kept perfect pace. And when the snow melted, it left no other trace of having been there, except for the photographs that prove it was. Fire is supposed to destroy, but sometimes it only marks. Sleeping Beauty. Peak rises to 5,900 feet along the southern edge of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, a dormant volcanic cone shaped by eruptions that ended roughly 12,000 years ago. The peak earned its name from early settlers who thought its silhouette resembled a reclining figure. The Forest Service maintains a lookout tower near the summit, staffed seasonally from June through September to monitor for wildfires. The surrounding terrain is dense with lodgepole pine, mountain hemlock, and expanses of dry underbrush that become a fire hazard by midsummer. Wildfire has always been a concern in this region. The forests here carry the scars of burns dating back decades, some from lightning strikes, others from human negligence. Fire suppression efforts have been standard practice since the early 20th century, though modern policy has shifted toward controlled burns and natural fire management. Still, every reported smoke sighting is investigated. Protocol is clear. Respond immediately. Assess the threat. Contain if necessary. On the afternoon of August 23, 1994, a fire lookout stationed at Sleeping Beauty reported smoke rising from a clearing approximately 1 mile southeast of the peak. The lookout, a seasonal ranger named Victoria Strand, radioed the district office at 1:47 p.m. She described the smoke as thin and white, rising in a narrow column with no visible spread. Wind conditions were calm. Temperature in the mid-70s. No lightning activity had been recorded in the area. A 3-person response team was dispatched. Rangers James Okello, David Hargrove, and a firefighter on loan from the Washington Department of Natural Resources named Luis Navarro. They arrived at the coordinates Strand had provided at 2:31 p.m., hiking in from the nearest forest road with hand tools, water packs, and radio equipment. What they found did not match the report. The clearing was roughly 60 feet across, bordered by standing timber. In the center, flames rose from the ground, orange and yellow, flickering as fire does, moving through dry grass and low shrubs. But there was no heat. Okello approached first. He later described the scene in a written incident report filed on August 25th. The flames were visible. They moved like fire. But when I got within 10 feet, I couldn't feel any warmth. I stopped maybe 6 feet away. Nothing. I held my hand out. Still nothing. Hargrove came up beside me. He said the same thing. No heat. Navarro, who had more than a decade of firefighting experience, moved closer. He knelt next to the flames and extended his hand directly above them, inches from the tallest points. He felt nothing. no radiant heat, no convection. The air temperature around the fire was identical to the surrounding forest. The flames continued to burn. Grass and small shrubs within the fire's perimeter appeared to darken as if scorched, but did not collapse or disintegrate. The fire spread slowly, advancing through the underbrush at a pace consistent with a low-intensity ground fire, but without the crackling sound, without smoke, other than the thin column Strand had seen from the lookout, and without any sensation of heat. Hargrove radioed back to the district office at 2:43 p.m. He reported the fire's location, size, and behavior. Then he added, "No heat signature. Repeat, no measurable heat. Flames are visible but cold." The dispatcher asked him to confirm. He did. Okello took the radio and confirmed as well. Navarro did not speak, but nodded when asked if he agreed with the assessment. The three men stood at the edge of the clearing and watched. The fire advanced for another 12 minutes, reaching the base of a fallen log on the eastern side of the clearing. The flames touched the wood. The bark darkened. The fire moved along the log's length, blackening it, but the wood did not ignite in the traditional sense. It did not crumble. It did not release smoke. It simply turned black and remained solid. At 3:06 p.m., the flames stopped. Not gradually, not by fading or diminishing. They simply ceased to exist. One moment, fire. The next, nothing. The clearing was silent. The blackened vegetation remained, motionless and intact. Okello approached the area where the flames had been. He touched the scorched grass. It was cold. He placed his palm on the darkened log. Cold. He broke off a piece of the blackened bark. It was brittle but structurally sound, as if it had been painted rather than burned. Navarro used a handheld infrared thermometer to measure surface temperatures across the clearing. Every reading came back within 2 degrees of ambient air temperature. There was no residual heat, no hot spots, no indication that combustion had occurred. The team collected samples of the affected vegetation and soil. They took photographs. They documented the scene as thoroughly as their equipment allowed. Then they hiked back to the road and returned to the district office. A follow-up team arrived the next day, led by District Fire Management Officer Patricia Valdez. She brought additional personnel and more sophisticated equipment: thermal cameras, gas detectors, soil sampling kits, and a portable weather station. They spent 6 hours at the site, examining the clearing from every angle. Valdez's report, dated August 27, 1994, included the following observations. Vegetation within the affected area shows surface charring consistent with low-intensity fire exposure. However, cellular structure remains intact. No evidence of combustion byproducts in soil samples. No elevated carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide levels detected. Thermal imaging shows no temperature differential between affected and unaffected areas. Conclusion: unknown causative agent. The samples collected by Okello's team were sent to a forest service research lab in Olympia. Analysis confirmed that the blackened material had undergone a chemical change. Carbon residue was present on the surface, but the underlying plant tissue was undamaged. The lab report noted that this was inconsistent with typical fire damage, which destroys cellulose and lignin at the cellular level. It's as if something mimicked the visual effects of fire without the thermal component, wrote Dr. Alan Forsyth, the chemist who analyzed the samples. I've never seen anything like it. The material looks burned, but it wasn't exposed to heat. At least not the kind of heat that fire produces. Valdez contacted the Washington Department of Natural Resources and requested input from their Fire Science Division. A specialist named Gregory Tan reviewed the documentation and visited the site on September 6th. His assessment offered no new insights. If the witnesses are accurate, and I have no reason to doubt them, then we're dealing with a phenomenon outside the normal parameters of wildfire behavior, he wrote in a memo dated September 9th. I cannot provide an explanation based on current understanding of combustion science. The Forest Service filed the incident as resolved, no ongoing threat, and closed the case. No public statement was issued. The clearing was not marked or restricted. Strand, the lookout who had first reported the smoke, completed her seasonal assignment and did not return the following year. Okello transferred to a different district in 1996. Hargrove left the Forest Service in 1998. Navarro continued working in fire suppression, but declined to discuss the incident in any recorded interviews. In 2002, a graduate student in environmental science at the University of Washington came across the case while researching anomalous wildfire reports in the Pacific Northwest. She contacted Valdez, who by then had retired, and asked for permission to review the original incident reports. Valdez agreed, but noted that the files contained nothing beyond what had already been documented. The student, Emily Rosenthal, included a brief mention of the incident in her thesis, describing it as an unexplained event involving visual flame characteristics without corresponding thermal output. The thesis was filed with the university library but received no significant attention. No similar incidents have been reported in Gifford Pinchot National Forest since 1994. The clearing near Sleeping Beauty Peak remains accessible to hikers, though few visit it. The blackened vegetation has long since decomposed and been replaced by new growth. Nothing about the site today suggests that anything unusual ever occurred there. But the photographs remain. The lab reports remain. The witness statements remain. And in those documents, preserved in Forest Service archives and university libraries, is the record of 18 minutes when fire burned without heat, left marks without destruction, and ended without explanation, a phenomenon that 4 trained observers saw, measured, and documented, but that no one has ever been able to recreate or understand. Some images decay faster than the paper they're printed on. Blue Lake sits at 4,300 feet in the Indian Heaven Wilderness, a protected area within Gifford Pinchot National Forest known for its concentration of alpine lakes and meadows. The lake itself is small, roughly 8 acres, surrounded by subalpine fir and mountain hemlock. The area was traditionally used by indigenous tribes for huckleberry harvesting, and evidence of their presence, stone tools, fire pits, modified trees, has been documented by archaeologists dating back thousands of years. The wilderness designation came in 1984, restricting motorized access and preserving the landscape in a relatively undisturbed state. The trail to Blue Lake is moderate in difficulty, approximately 3 miles from the nearest trailhead. It sees steady use during summer months, but remains quiet in shoulder seasons. The Forest Service maintains the trail, but does not staff the area. Visitors are responsible for their own safety and waste disposal. Lost items, gear, clothing, personal effects are occasionally found and turned in to ranger stations, where they are logged and held for retrieval. On September 19, 2008, a day hiker named Marcus Holloway discovered a disposable camera lying on a flat rock near the eastern shore of Blue Lake. The camera was a Fujifilm QuickSnap, a common model sold at drugstores and convenience stores. It showed signs of weather exposure. The cardboard casing was damp and slightly warped, but the internal mechanism appeared intact. Holloway picked it up, assuming someone had dropped it recently, and brought it to the Trout Lake Ranger Station the following day. The ranger on duty, a woman named Diane Kettering, logged the camera as lost property and set it aside. Standard procedure was to hold such items for 90 days before disposal. However, Kettering was curious. Disposable cameras often contained vacation photos, and she thought developing the film might help identify the owner. On September 23rd, she took the camera to a photo processing lab in White Salmon, a small town approximately 30 miles from the ranger station. The lab returned the developed prints on September 26th. There were 27 exposures. All showed scenes from the forest, trees, undergrowth, sections of trail, the lake itself. No people, no identifying landmarks beyond the natural landscape. The photos were competently framed, but unremarkable. They could have been taken anywhere in the Indian Heaven Wilderness. Kettering stored the prints in a standard archival sleeve, acid-free plastic designed to preserve photographs, and filed them with the camera in the lost property cabinet. She noted in the log that the owner had not been identified and that the item would be disposed of after the 90-day hold period. 3 weeks later, on October 17th, Kettering retrieved the file to update the log. When she pulled out the archival sleeve, she noticed something unusual. The photographs looked different. The colors appeared muted, as if the prints had faded. She assumed this was a flaw in the developing process or poor quality film, but the change seemed more pronounced than normal aging would account for. She examined the prints more closely. The trees in the images, vibrant green in late September, now appeared dull, almost gray. The sky, which had been bright in several shots, looked darker, overcast. She compared the prints to her memory of viewing them 3 weeks earlier. The difference was obvious. Kettering mentioned this to a colleague, Ranger Paul Dominic, who suggested that temperature fluctuations in the storage cabinet might have affected the prints. The cabinet was not climate-controlled, and autumn temperatures in the station could vary significantly between day and night. Dominic recommended storing the prints in a more stable environment. Kettering moved them to a filing drawer in the station's administrative office, which was heated and maintained at a relatively constant temperature. By mid-November, the degradation had accelerated. The trees in the photographs were no longer recognizable as living vegetation. They appeared skeletal, bare of foliage, as if photographed in winter rather than late summer. The ground, which had been covered in undergrowth and ferns, looked barren. The sky in every image was uniformly dark, not black, but a deep gray that suggested storm clouds or twilight. Kettering documented the changes with her own camera, photographing the prints at weekly intervals. She noted the dates and stored the secondary images in a separate file. She also contacted the photo lab in White Salmon and asked if there had been any issues with the developing process. The lab technician, a man named Stuart Rocha, reviewed his records and confirmed that the prints had been processed according to standard procedures. He suggested that the film itself might have been defective or exposed to radiation, which could cause unusual degradation. Kettering retrieved the negatives from the lab and examined them under magnification. The negatives appeared normal. The images on the negatives matched what the prints had looked like when first developed: green trees, bright skies, intact vegetation. There was no sign of degradation on the negatives themselves. By early December, the prints had deteriorated further. The trees were now barely visible. The landscape in each photograph appeared indistinct, obscured by what looked like fog or heavy mist. Details that had been clear 2 months earlier, rocks, trail markers, the shoreline of the lake, were no longer discernible. The images were fading into uniformity, all converging toward the same washed-out gray. Kettering showed the prints to Dominic and 2 other rangers at the station. All confirmed that the changes were real and progressive. One ranger, Elena Bradford, suggested contacting a specialist in photographic preservation. Kettering reached out to a conservator at the Washington State Archives in Olympia, a woman named Dr. Margaret Stillwell, and described the phenomenon. Stillwell expressed skepticism but agreed to examine the prints. Kettering mailed them to Olympia on December 9th. Stillwell received the package on December 12th and conducted a preliminary analysis. She noted in her report, dated December 15th, that the prints showed unusual and accelerated degradation inconsistent with standard photographic aging processes. She tested the paper and emulsion layer and found no chemical abnormalities. The materials were consistent with standard commercial photo paper used by processing labs. The degradation pattern is atypical, Stillwell wrote. Normally, photographic prints fade uniformly, losing color saturation gradually over time. These prints are deteriorating in a way that suggests selective breakdown. Specific elements within the image are fading faster than others, and the overall effect is one of progressive obscuration rather than simple fading. I cannot identify a known mechanism that would produce this result. Stillwell recommended storing the prints in a controlled environment with low humidity and stable temperature, which she could provide at the State Archives. Kettering agreed, and the prints remained in Olympia under Stillwell's supervision. By February of 2009, 6 months after development, the prints had become almost entirely blank. The images were gone, replaced by a uniform field of gray-white. A few faint shadows remained, barely visible, but no recognizable features. The negatives, still stored separately, remained unchanged. Stillwell documented the progression in a series of scans made at 2-week intervals. The scans showed a consistent pattern: gradual loss of detail, progressive darkening of lighter areas, eventual convergence toward a featureless gray tone. The process was not uniform across all prints. Some degraded faster than others, but the endpoint was the same. In March, Stillwell contacted a colleague at the Smithsonian Institution's Museum Conservation Institute, a chemist named Dr. Harold Vega, and asked him to review the case. Vega examined the scans and the physical prints and concluded that no known photographic or chemical process could explain the observed degradation. The prints were stored under archival conditions, Vega wrote in a letter dated April 3, 2009. They were not exposed to light, heat, moisture, or contaminants. The paper and emulsion show no signs of chemical breakdown. Yet the images have disappeared. This is not consistent with any documented form of photographic deterioration. If the account is accurate, then we are dealing with a phenomenon that falls outside the boundaries of current conservation science. The Forest Service was notified of the findings in May. A representative from the regional office reviewed the documentation but declined to pursue further investigation. The case was noted in internal records as unexplained material degradation and filed without additional comment. Kettering retained copies of the scans Stillwell had made. The original prints, now nearly blank, remained in storage at the State Archives. The negatives were returned to the Trout Lake Ranger Station, where they are still kept in the lost property file. No owner ever claimed the camera. No one came forward to identify the photographs or explain their origin. The location where the camera was found, near Blue Lake, was revisited by rangers on multiple occasions. No anomalies were observed. The landscape appeared normal. The prints that once showed a forest in late summer now show nothing, but the negatives, which captured the same forest in the same moment, remain clear and unchanged. And somewhere in the administrative files of the Washington State Archives, there are scans documenting the 6-month transformation, a record of images that aged, darkened, and disappeared, while the film that made them stayed frozen in time. Maps are supposed to be fixed, but some landmarks refuse to stay still. Steamboat Lake lies in the southeastern corner of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, a shallow body of water formed in a volcanic depression during the eruption cycles that shaped the Cascade Range millions of years ago. The lake sits at an elevation of 3,800 feet, surrounded by dense stands of Pacific silver fir and Douglas fir. Access is via Forest Road 21, which connects to a network of trails used primarily by day hikers and anglers. The area is not heavily trafficked, perhaps a few dozen visitors per week during summer months, and sees almost no use between November and May when snow closes the roads. The trail system around Steamboat Lake was formally surveyed and mapped by the United States Geological Survey in 1972 as part of a broader effort to document recreational resources in national forests. The maps produced from that survey show a trail junction approximately 1/4 mile northeast of the lake, where a spur trail diverges from the main loop. The junction was marked with a wooden signpost, a standard Forest Service installation with routed directional arrows indicating distances and destinations. For decades, the junction appeared exactly where the maps indicated. Trail maintenance crews referenced it in work logs. Hikers used it as a navigational landmark. The Forest Service replaced the signpost twice, once in 1986 after winter damage, and again in 1998 as part of a routine upkeep. Each time, the new post was installed in the same location, confirmed by GPS coordinates: 46.173 degrees north, 121.582 degrees west. In July of 2006, a group of 4 hikers, Sarah Pasternak, Kevin Rojas, Timothy Wolf, and Jennifer Huang, completed the loop trail around Steamboat Lake. Pasternak, an experienced navigator who carried a handheld GPS unit, noted something unusual when they reached what should have been the trail junction. The signpost was not where the GPS indicated it should be. According to her device, they were standing at the recorded coordinates. But the signpost was visible roughly 200 yards to the north, clearly within sight, but in the wrong location. The group walked to the signpost. Pasternak checked her GPS. Again. The coordinates now read 46.175 degrees north, 121.582 degrees west, placing them 200 yards north of the mapped junction. She marked the location as a waypoint and took a photograph of the signpost. When they returned to their vehicle, Pasternak mentioned the discrepancy to a ranger at the Randall office. The ranger, a seasonal employee named Lucas Moretti, checked the Forest Service database and confirmed that the junction's coordinates had not changed since the original survey. He suggested that Pasternak's GPS might have been inaccurate due to poor satellite reception under heavy tree cover. Pasternak was not convinced. She had used the same GPS unit on dozens of hikes without issue, and the reception near Steamboat Lake had been clear. Open sky, minimal canopy. She posted about the experience on a hiking forum, noting the discrepancy and asking if anyone else had encountered something similar. 2 weeks later, a user named Dylan Green replied he had hiked the same trail in August of 2005 and photographed the signpost. He included GPS coordinates from his own device, 46.171 degrees north, 121.581 degrees west. The signpost, according to his data, had been 200 yards south of where Pasternak had found it. A third hiker, a woman named Verity Koslowski, added her account in September of 2006. She had visited the junction in June of that year and recorded coordinates placing the signpost 200 yards east of the mapped location. She had not thought much of it at the time, assuming the maps were outdated. But after reading the forum posts, she realized that the signpost seemed to be appearing in different locations for different people. By October, 7 separate hikers had reported similar experiences. All had used GPS devices. All had recorded coordinates that did not match the USGS map. The signpost appeared to be in a different location each time, always offset from the mapped coordinates by roughly 200 yards, but in varying directions, north, south, east, west, and occasionally northeast or southwest. In November of 2006, a Forest Service trail crew was dispatched to investigate. The crew consisted of 3 members, Foreman Angela Prieto and technicians Marcus Okafor and Samantha Driscoll. They carried professional-grade GPS units, surveying equipment, and copies of the original USGS maps. They hiked to the coordinates listed on the map, 46.173 degrees north, 121.582 degrees west. The signpost was not there. They searched the immediate area and found it approximately 200 yards to the west. Prieto marked the location with flagging tape and recorded the coordinates, 46.173 degrees north, 121.585 degrees west. The crew inspected the signpost. It was firmly planted in the ground, set in concrete as per standard installation procedures. There was no evidence that it had been moved, no disturbed soil, no old post holes, no drag marks. The ground around the base showed normal weathering and vegetation growth, consistent with a post that had been in place for several years. Prieto radioed the district office and reported the findings. She was instructed to remove the signpost and reinstall it at the correct coordinates. The crew did so on November 14th. They dug out the old post, filled the hole, and installed a new post at the mapped location. The installation was verified with GPS and documented with photographs. 3 weeks later, on December 7th, A hiker named Raymond Estrada reported that the signpost was not at the mapped location. He had used a GPS unit to navigate to the junction and found the signpost 200 yards to the south. He photographed it and submitted the image to the Forest Service along with his GPS data. Prieto returned to the site on December 12th. The signpost was not where her crew had installed it. She found it 200 yards south, exactly as Estrada had reported. The post was firmly planted with no sign of disturbance. The original installation site showed no evidence of recent digging. The ground was frozen, undisturbed, covered with a thin layer of snow. Prieto's report, filed on December 15th, stated, "Signpost relocated without authorization. No evidence of human interference. Recommend further investigation." The district office forwarded the report to the regional office in Portland. A supervisor, Kenneth Vasquez, reviewed the case and requested a meeting with Prieto. The meeting took place on January 9, 2007. Vasquez asked detailed questions about the installation process, the condition of the site, and the crew's observations. Prieto provided her field notes and photographs. Vasquez took copies but offered no explanation. In February, the Forest Service conducted a formal survey of the junction using professional surveying equipment and multiple GPS units. The survey team, led by cartographer Dr. Eileen Rafferty, spent 2 days at the site. They confirmed the original USGS coordinates and verified that the signpost was not at that location. They found it 200 yards to the east. Rafferty noted in her report that the discrepancy was unexplained and inconsistent with standard cartographic error. The Forest Service did not issue a public statement. Internal memos obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request in 2014 show that the case was discussed at multiple administrative levels, but no action was taken. One memo, dated March 23, 2007, stated, "Issue acknowledged but not resolved. Recommend monitoring without intervention." The signpost was not moved again by Forest Service personnel. Over the following years, hikers continued to report finding it in different locations. A GPS tracking project initiated by a group of amateur researchers in 2010 documented 17 separate sightings over a 2-year period. The signpost appeared within a roughly 400-yard radius of the mapped coordinates, but never at the mapped location itself. The pattern was irregular. No correlation was found with weather, season, time of day, or any other measurable variable. In 2012, a geophysicist from the University of Oregon, Dr. Harold Yun, visited the site as part of a study on magnetic anomalies in volcanic terrain. He conducted magnetometer surveys and found no unusual readings. Soil samples showed normal composition. Bedrock geology was consistent with the surrounding area. Yun concluded that there was no geophysical explanation for the reported discrepancies. The Forest Service replaced the signpost one final time in 2015, installing a metal post with updated trail information. The installation was documented with precise GPS coordinates and high-resolution photographs. Within 6 months, hikers reported finding the post in locations that did not match the installation site. As of this writing, the junction near Steamboat Lake remains marked on USGS maps at the same coordinates established in 1972. The signpost continues to exist. Hikers continue to find it, but its location remains inconsistent, appearing in different places depending on who looks for it and when. The Forest Service maintains the trail, but has ceased attempting to correct the signpost's position. Rangers at the Randall office acknowledge the phenomenon when asked, but offer no official explanation. The maps have not been updated. The coordinates have not changed. And somewhere in the forest near Steamboat Lake, a signpost stands where it should not be, waiting to be found in a place it was never installed, a marker that refuses to mark the same spot twice. There are 17 minutes each day when sound itself seems to leave the forest. The Cispus River flows southwest through Gifford Pinchot National Forest, fed by snowmelt from the Goat Rocks Wilderness and smaller tributaries that drain the eastern slopes of the Cascade Range. The river is cold, clear, and fast-moving, carving through basalt and ancient volcanic deposits laid down over millions of years. Iron Creek Campground sits along a relatively calm stretch of the river, where the gradient flattens and the water spreads into shallow runs popular with anglers and families. The campground has been in operation since the 1930s, when the Civilian Conservation Corps built the first access roads and picnic facilities. It remains one of the more accessible sites in the forest, open from May through September, with basic amenities and numbered campsites nestled among old-growth Douglas fir and western red cedar. The area is not silent. The river produces a constant ambient noise, the rush of water over stones, the occasional splash of fish, the low rumble of deeper currents. Birds are abundant: Steller's jays, varied thrushes, gray jays, and woodpeckers. Insects hum in the undergrowth. Wind moves through the canopy. The soundscape is typical of Pacific Northwest riparian zones, layered, continuous, alive. On the morning of June 8, 2009, a wildlife biologist named Dr. Trevor Ibarra was conducting audio surveys along the Cispus River as part of a study on avian diversity in managed forest lands. Ibarra had set up recording equipment at 3 locations near Iron Creek Campground, each station consisting of a directional microphone connected to a digital recorder programmed to capture ambient sound continuously for 12-hour periods. The goal was to document species presence through vocalization patterns. Ibarra retrieved the equipment on June 10th and began reviewing the recordings. The first 2 stations produced expected results: bird calls, insect noise, water sounds, occasional human voices from the campground. The third station, positioned approximately 150 feet upstream from the campground entrance, showed something unusual. At 11:17 a.m. on June 8th, the audio went silent. Not quiet, silent. The waveform on the recording software displayed a flat line, no sound. The silence lasted exactly 17 minutes, ending abruptly at 11:34 a.m. when normal ambient noise resumed. Ibarra assumed the equipment had malfunctioned. He checked the recorder's internal diagnostics. No errors. The device had continued running throughout the silent period, recording nothing because there was nothing to record. He examined the microphone. No visible damage. He tested the equipment in his office. It functioned normally. He returned to the site on June 15th and set up the recorder again, this time staying nearby to observe. At 11:17 a.m., the forest fell silent. The river continued to flow. Ibarra could see it moving, see the water cascading over rocks and pooling in eddies. But he heard nothing. No sound from the water, no birds, no insects, no wind. He stood motionless, listening to an absence so complete it felt physical. At 11:34 a.m., sound returned. A jay called. The river roared. The silence ended as suddenly as it had begun, with no transition, no fade in. One moment, nothing. The next, everything. Ibarra documented the observation in his field notes. He checked his watch and confirmed the timing. 11:17 to 11:34, exactly 17 minutes. He recorded a second audio sample. The same result. 17 minutes of flatline, then normal sound. He reported the phenomenon to the Forest Service on June 17th. A ranger at the Randall office, a woman named Patricia Villalobos, listened to the recordings and confirmed that the silence was real and measurable. She suggested that atmospheric conditions, temperature inversions, unusual humidity might be dampening sound waves. Ibarra agreed to investigate further. Over the following weeks, Ibarra returned to the site 9 more times. The silence occurred on 7 of those visits, always between 11:17 and 11:34 a.m., always lasting exactly 17 minutes. On 2 occasions, the phenomenon did not occur. Both of those days had been overcast with light rain. Every occurrence happened on cloudless days with clear skies. Ibarra invited colleagues to witness the event. On July 9th, 3 other researchers joined him: Dr. Yolanda Reyes, an acoustician from Portland State University; Dr. Mark Sundberg, a geophysicist from the University of Washington; and graduate student Priya Kamath, who was assisting Ibarra with the avian study. All 4 stood near the river at 11:15 a.m. At 11:17, the silence began. All 4 confirmed it. The river was visible and flowing. No sound. Reyes had brought a decibel meter and a spectrum analyzer. The meter registered 0. The analyzer showed no measurable sound frequencies. She clapped her hands. No sound. She shouted. No sound. Sundberg struck 2 rocks together. Visible impact. No audible result. It wasn't that the sound was quiet, Reyes later explained in a recorded interview. It was gone, completely absent. I've worked in anechoic chambers, rooms designed to eliminate all reflected sound, and this was more extreme than that. In an anechoic chamber, you can still hear your own heartbeat, your breathing, the small sounds your body makes. Here, there was nothing. It was as if sound itself had been removed from that space. Kamath recorded video footage during the silence. The video shows the river flowing, trees swaying slightly in a breeze, Reyes clapping her hands and speaking, her mouth moving but producing no audio on the recording. The timestamp reads 11:23 a.m. At 11:34, sound returned. The video captures the transition. 1 frame, silence. Next frame, the full roar of the river, the rustle of wind, a jay calling in the distance. No gradual increase, instantaneous. The group returned on July 16th with additional equipment: seismographs to detect ground vibrations, anemometers to measure wind, temperature and humidity sensors, and a second set of recording devices positioned at varying distances from the river. The silence occurred again. All instruments functioned normally, recording environmental data throughout the event, but the audio recorders captured nothing. Sundberg analyzed the seismic data. The river was producing vibrations. The movement of water over substrate generated measurable ground motion, but those vibrations were not translating into airborne sound. The physical act of water flowing continued, Sundberg said. The energy was there. It just wasn't becoming audible. Something was preventing the conversion of mechanical energy into sound waves, or sound waves were being absorbed or canceled immediately upon generation. Reyes proposed that the phenomenon might be related to atmospheric acoustics, a rare alignment of temperature, humidity, and air pressure that created a zone of perfect sound absorption. But her calculations showed that such conditions would require an implausibly precise set of variables, sustained over 17 minutes, in a localized area no more than a few hundred feet across. Theoretically possible, she said, but I've never encountered documentation of anything similar, and I can't explain why it would occur with such regularity and precision. The Forest Service was formally notified in August. A district officer, Gerald Amsler, reviewed the researchers' findings and visited the site on August 27th. The silence occurred as described. Amsler documented the event and filed a report. The report concluded that an unexplained acoustic anomaly has been observed and verified by multiple witnesses, but poses no immediate safety risk or management concern. No further action was taken. The Forest Service did not restrict access to the area or post warnings. Internal correspondence, obtained through a public records request in 2015, shows that regional administrators discussed the phenomenon but determined that without a clear explanation or evidence of danger, no intervention was warranted. Ibarra published his findings in a peer-reviewed journal in 2010. The paper, titled Temporal Acoustic Null Event in Riparian Forest Environment, described the observations and presented the collected data. It offered no conclusions. The paper received limited attention, cited occasionally in discussions of unexplained natural phenomena, but largely ignored by the broader scientific community. A follow-up study conducted by a different research team in 2012 attempted to replicate Ibarra's observations. The team confirmed that the silence occurred with the same timing and duration. They deployed more sophisticated equipment, including laser interferometry, to detect air molecule movement. The data showed that air was moving, wind was present, but sound waves were not. The study's authors concluded that the phenomenon was real but beyond current understanding of acoustic physics. In 2018, a documentary crew filming a series on natural mysteries spent 3 days at the site. They recorded the silence and interviewed Ibarra, Reyes, and several Forest Service personnel. The footage was broadcast on a cable network and generated brief public interest. The campground saw a small increase in visitors that summer, many hoping to experience the silence. Most succeeded. The phenomenon continues. Rangers occasionally mention it when asked. Campers sometimes report the experience, posting about it on forums, sharing recordings. The Forest Service maintains the campground but offers no official explanation. The site remains accessible, and every cloudless day between 11:17 and 11:34 a.m., the Cispus River falls silent. The water flows, the trees stand, the world continues. But for 17 minutes, sound leaves the forest, and no one can say where it goes. Some patterns should only appear once in a lifetime. The Goat Rocks Wilderness spans more than 105,000 acres along the crest of the Cascade Range, straddling the boundary between Gifford Pinchot and Wenatchee National Forests. The terrain is rugged, glaciated peaks, alpine meadows, and steep valleys carved by ice and water over millennia. The lower elevations support extensive old-growth forests, primarily Douglas fir, western hemlock, and Pacific silver fir, some exceeding 500 years in age. These forests have been protected since the wilderness designation in 1964, which prohibited logging, road construction, and motorized access. The trees here represent some of the oldest living organisms in Washington state, survivors of fire, drought, disease, and the slow violence of time. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, relies on the principle that each year of a tree's life produces a distinct growth layer. The width and density of these rings vary with environmental conditions. Wet years produce wide rings, dry years, narrow ones, cold years, dense wood, warm years, less so. By comparing ring patterns across multiple trees, researchers can reconstruct historical climate data with remarkable precision. The patterns are unique. A specific sequence of environmental conditions produces a specific sequence of rings. No two periods should look identical unless the conditions themselves were identical. A statistical improbability over centuries. In the summer of 2007, a team of researchers from the University of Washington School of Environmental and Forest Sciences conducted a dendrochronological survey in the Goat Rocks Wilderness. The project, led by Dr. Helena Varga, aimed to develop a long-term climate record for the Southern Cascades using cores extracted from old-growth Douglas firs. The team included 2 graduate students, Mikkel Strand and Lucia Tavares, and a field technician named Gregory Oshiro. The team established a study site in a remote valley approximately 3 miles west of Goat Lake, accessible only by trail. The valley contained a stand of Douglas firs estimated to be between 400 and 600 years old. On July 12th, the team extracted core samples from 15 trees using an increment borer, a hollow drill that removes a pencil-thin cylinder of wood from the trunk without killing the tree. The cores were transported back to the university lab for analysis. Each sample was mounted, sanded, and examined under magnification to count and measure the annual rings. The process is meticulous. Rings are measured to the nearest hundredth of a millimeter. Patterns are cross-referenced between trees to ensure accuracy and identify common climate signals. By September, Varga noticed something unusual in the data. 3 of the core samples showed sequences of rings that appeared twice within the same tree, identical patterns separated by several decades. She assumed this was a measurement error or a labeling mistake. She re-examined the samples. The patterns were real. The first tree, designated GT0703, showed a sequence of 19 rings dating from approximately 1640 to 1659. That same sequence, identical ring widths, identical density patterns, identical cellular structure, appeared again in the tree's growth record from 1732 to 1751. The 2 sequences were separated by 73 years, yet they were indistinguishable at a cellular level. Varga cross-referenced the findings with the other core samples. 2 additional trees showed similar repetitions. One repeated a 12-ring sequence. The other repeated a 10-ring sequence. In each case, the repeated pattern appeared decades after the original, with no apparent connection to the intervening years. She brought the findings to her faculty advisor, Dr. Samuel Nkosi, a dendroclimatologist with 30 years of experience. Nkosi reviewed the samples and confirmed the observations. "I've never seen this," he said in a recorded conversation from October 2007. "Growth rings reflect environmental conditions. If you see an identical pattern twice, it means the conditions were identical twice. But that doesn't happen. Weather varies. Even similar years show subtle differences in temperature, precipitation, timing of seasons. To have 19 consecutive years replicate exactly decades later is beyond improbable. It's impossible." Varga hypothesized that the cores might have been contaminated or mislabeled during processing. She returned to the field site in October and extracted new samples from the same trees, documenting each step with photographs and detailed field notes. The new samples confirmed the original findings. The repeated ring patterns were present and consistent. By November, the team had expanded the survey, extracting cores from 30 additional trees within a half-mile radius of the original site. 11 trees showed repeated ring sequences. All repetitions occurred in clusters, groups of 8 to 12 trees within a few hundred feet of one another. Isolated trees, even within the same forest, showed no repetitions. The phenomenon was localized and selective. Tavares, who had a background in statistical analysis, calculated the probability of the observed patterns occurring by chance. Her analysis, completed in December, concluded that the likelihood was less than 1 in 10 million. "These aren't random coincidences," she wrote in her thesis notes. "The trees are producing identical growth patterns decades apart, and they're doing it in groups. Something is causing this, but I don't know what." The team submitted a preliminary report to the Forest Service in January of 2008. The report detailed the findings and requested permission to expand the study to other areas within the Goat Rocks Wilderness. The Forest Service acknowledged receipt, but did not respond further. In March, Varga contacted colleagues at other institutions to see if similar patterns had been observed elsewhere. Dr. Francine Allard, a dendrochronologist at Oregon State University, reviewed the data and expressed skepticism. "I'd need to see the samples myself," Allard said, "but if your measurements are accurate, this contradicts everything we know about tree growth. Rings don't repeat. They can't. Each year is unique." Varga invited Allard to visit the lab. Allard examined the core samples in April and confirmed the findings. "I don't have an explanation," Allard said in a follow-up email. "The patterns are there, the measurements are consistent, but I can't tell you why." The team prepared a manuscript for publication, detailing the methodology, findings, and implications. The paper was submitted to the journal Dendrochronologia in June of 2008. It was rejected. The reviewers noted that while the data was well documented, the conclusions were implausible without a mechanistic explanation, and suggested that unidentified errors in sampling or measurement were a more likely explanation than the proposed phenomenon. Varga revised the manuscript and submitted it to a second journal. It was rejected again. A third submission was accepted by a smaller regional journal focused on Pacific Northwest ecology, but the paper received little attention. Most citations referenced it as an anomaly or a cautionary tale about the limits of dendrochronological methods. In 2010, a second research team from the University of British Columbia visited the Goat Rock site to conduct an independent verification. They extracted cores from 12 of the trees Varga's team had sampled. Their analysis confirmed the repeated ring patterns. "We don't dispute the observations," wrote Dr. Ethan Caldwell, the team leader. "The patterns exist, but without understanding the mechanism, we can't interpret what they mean. Are the trees responding to some cyclical environmental condition we're not aware of? Is there a genetic factor? We don't know." The Forest Service conducted a brief review of the site in 2011. A regional ecologist, Dr. Nora Salazar, examined the study area and collected additional samples. Her report, filed in September, stated, "Anomalous growth patterns observed and verified. No evidence of human interference or disease. Phenomenon remains unexplained. Recommend continued monitoring, but no immediate action." No further studies were funded. Varga completed her research project and moved to a faculty position at a different university. Strand and Tavares graduated and pursued careers outside dendrochronology. Oshiro left academia. The Goat Rock site was not revisited by researchers. The core samples remain in storage at the University of Washington, cataloged and available for review. The data has been archived. The findings have been documented in a handful of publications and conference presentations. But the phenomenon itself, the repeated ring patterns, the clustering, the temporal separation, has never been explained. And in the forest near Goat Lake, the trees continue to grow. Each year adds a new ring, a new layer of wood, a new record of the conditions that shaped it. Most trees follow the expected pattern. Their rings are unique, unrepeatable, tied to the specific circumstances of each passing year. But in certain clusters, scattered through the wilderness, some trees remember. They replicate patterns from decades past with perfect fidelity, as if time itself had folded back and produced the same sequence twice. And no one can say whether this is an error in how we understand growth, or whether the trees are recording something we cannot measure, a signal we do not yet know how to read. Some things refuse to stay destroyed. Wallopped Lake occupies a glacial basin at 3,900 feet in the southern reaches of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, roughly 12 miles from the nearest paved road. The lake is small, approximately 1 mile long, and remote enough that it sees limited traffic outside peak summer weekends. The surrounding terrain is typical of subalpine zones in the southern Cascades: lodgepole pine, mountain hemlock, and open meadows that bloom with wildflowers in July and August. The Forest Service maintains a basic campground at the lake's northern end, with pit toilets and a boat launch but no running water or electricity. Cell service does not reach the area. Visitors come for solitude, fishing, and access to trails leading deeper into the wilderness. The lake has no particular historical significance. Indigenous groups from the region used the area seasonally but left no permanent settlements. Early Forest Service records mention the lake only in passing, a minor waypoint on larger surveys conducted in the 1920s and 30s. It was never logged, never mined, never developed beyond the minimal infrastructure that exists today. It is, in most respects, unremarkable. In the late summer of 1998, a seasonal ranger named Douglas Gifford was conducting routine maintenance along the trails near Wallup Lake. On August 14th, while checking the condition of a footbridge that crossed a small creek feeding into the lake, Gifford noticed a cairn, a deliberate stack of stones positioned on a flat rock approximately 20 feet from the trail. The cairn stood roughly 3 feet tall and consisted of 11 stones, each larger at the base and progressively smaller toward the top. Cairns are common in wilderness areas, often built by hikers to mark trails or commemorate a visit. The Forest Service discourages the practice. Unofficial cairns can confuse navigation and disturb natural landscapes. But enforcement is inconsistent. Gifford made a note of the cairn's location and, following standard procedure, dismantled it. He scattered the stones into the surrounding brush, away from the trail, and continued his patrol. 3 days later, on August 17th, Gifford returned to the same section of trail. The cairn had been rebuilt. Same location, same stones, same configuration. He assumed another hiker had reassembled it, though he found this curious. The stones had been scattered deliberately, and rebuilding the cairn would have required someone to search for each piece and reconstruct it from memory or intent. Gifford dismantled the cairn again, this time photographing it before and after. He scattered the stones more widely, placing several in the creek where they would be submerged and less easily retrieved. He documented the action in his daily log and moved on. On August 20th, the cairn was back. 11 stones, 3 feet tall, identical arrangement. The stones from the creek had been retrieved and dried. Gifford took more photographs. He noted in his log, "Cairn rebuilt for second time. Unknown party persistent. Will monitor." Over the following 2 weeks, Gifford dismantled the cairn 4 more times. Each time, it reappeared within 72 hours. Same stones, same structure. He began marking the stones with a grease pencil, numbering them 1 through 11 to confirm they were the same pieces. They were. Each reconstruction used the original stones in the original order. Gifford reported the matter to his supervisor, District Ranger Angela Ortiz, in early September. Ortiz visited the site on September 8th and observed the cairn. She agreed it was unusual, but suggested that a dedicated hiker or local resident might be responsible, someone committed to maintaining the structure as a personal project or statement. She recommended continuing to dismantle it, but not to escalate the matter unless it became a larger issue. Gifford left the cairn standing for 2 weeks as an experiment. When he returned on September 22nd, it remained exactly as he had last seen it. No changes, no additions. On September 23rd, he dismantled it again. On September 25th, it was rebuilt. By the end of the season, the cairn had been dismantled and rebuilt 6 times. Gifford completed his seasonal assignment and returned home in late September. The cairn stood when he left. The following summer, a different ranger, a woman named Lucia Fernandez, was assigned to the Wallup Lake area. She was briefed on the cairn during orientation. In June of 1999, she dismantled it as part of her routine duties. 3 days later, it was back. She dismantled it again. It returned. She documented each instance as Gifford had and reached the same conclusion. Someone was rebuilding it, but she never saw anyone do so. In July, Fernandez installed a motion-activated trail camera 15 feet from the cairn, angled to capture anyone approaching the site. The camera recorded for 2 weeks. During that period, the cairn was dismantled once and rebuilt once. The camera captured images of deer, a black bear, several hikers passing on the trail, but no one approaching the cairn or handling the stones. Fernandez reviewed the footage carefully. The cairn appeared intact in one image, time-stamped at 6:43 a.m. on July 19th. It was dismantled by Fernandez herself at 9:15 a.m. the same day, an action she logged in her field notes. The next image showing the cairn's location was time-stamped at 7:12 a.m. on July 21st. The cairn was fully rebuilt. No images captured the reconstruction. The camera's motion sensor was functioning. It had triggered for passing wildlife and distant hikers, but it had not triggered for whoever or whatever had rebuilt the cairn. Fernandez reported the findings to Ortiz, who visited the site again in early August. Ortiz reviewed the camera footage and examined the cairn. She noted in a memo dated August 9, 1999, "Cairn Samuelson continues to be rebuilt by unknown party. Camera surveillance inconclusive. Recommend discontinuing dismantling efforts and allowing structure to remain." The Forest Service adopted this policy. The cairn was left standing. Over the following years, rangers occasionally checked on it during patrols. It remained intact, showing no signs of weathering or disturbance beyond what would be expected from natural erosion. In 2004, a group of vandals, 3 teenagers from a nearby town, deliberately destroyed the cairn, kicking the stones into the creek and scattering them across a wide area. The incident was reported by a hiker who witnessed the act. A ranger investigated the following day. The stones were gone, the site empty. 3 days later, the cairn was back. All 11 stones, original configuration. The teenagers were questioned. They confirmed they had destroyed the cairn, but denied returning to rebuild it. "We threw those rocks everywhere," one of them said in a statement provided to the Forest Service. "There's no way someone found them all and put them back like that. We didn't even remember what it looked like." In 2007, a geology professor from Central Washington University, Dr. Raymond Blackwell, visited the site as part of a field study on glacial deposits. He heard about the cairn from a ranger and became curious. He examined the stones and determined they were locally sourced, granite and basalt, consistent with the surrounding geology. He photographed the cairn and, with permission from the Forest Service, dismantled it to examine how the stones fit together. The stones were not uniform. Each had an irregular shape. Yet they stacked with remarkable stability, interlocking in a way that suggested deliberate selection and placement. Blackwell documented the configuration in detail, measuring each stone and noting its position. He scattered the stones and left the site. 4 days later, he returned. The cairn was rebuilt. He compared it to his photographs. Identical. He measured the stones in place, same positions, same orientations. He had scattered 11 stones across an area of approximately 50 square feet. Someone had retrieved them, identified their correct order, and reassembled them precisely. Blackwell set up his own camera, more sophisticated than the trail camera Fernandez had used, capable of capturing time-lapse images every 30 seconds. He left it running for 5 days. The cairn was dismantled by Blackwell on the first day. By the 3rd day, it was rebuilt. The camera recorded the entire period. No reconstruction appeared in any frame. One image showed scattered stones. 30 frames later, 15 minutes of real time, the cairn was complete. Blackwell could not explain it. Either the reconstruction happened in less than 30 seconds, he said in an interview conducted for a regional newspaper, in 2008, or it happened in a way the camera couldn't detect. I don't know which possibility is more unsettling. The Forest Service declined to comment publicly on the phenomenon. Internal documents obtained through a records request in 2016 show that district administrators were aware of the cairn's behavior but considered it a low priority. One memo, dated October 2009, stated, "Cairn presents no safety hazard and does not interfere with forest management objectives. Recommend no further action. Since 1998, the cairn has been documented as dismantled 14 times. Each time, it has returned within 72 hours. Rangers no longer dismantle it. Hikers occasionally photograph it and post about it online, describing it as a local curiosity. Some leave offerings, coins, flowers, small trinkets, which are removed by rangers during routine cleanups. The cairn itself is never removed. As of this writing, the cairn stands near Walloped Lake, unchanged. 11 stones, 3 feet tall, positioned on a flat rock 20 feet from the trail. It has stood for more than 25 years, rebuilt by no one anyone has ever seen, restored by hands that leave no trace. And on the rare occasions when someone dismantles it out of curiosity, frustration, or disbelief, the stones wait in the brush, scattered and silent, until the forest decides it is time for them to stand again. There are sounds that approach but never reach. Panther Creek Campground sits in a narrow valley along the southern edge of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, hemmed in by steep ridges covered in Douglas fir and western red cedar. The creek itself flows year-round, fed by springs and snowmelt from higher elevations, and the sound of moving water is constant, a low, steady murmur that fills the space between the trees. The campground was established in the 1950s by the Forest Service and consists of 33 sites arranged in 2 loops, each with a fire ring, picnic table, and gravel parking pad. The sites are separated by thick undergrowth, offering a degree of privacy uncommon in developed campgrounds. The area is popular with families and weekend campers, but rarely fills to capacity outside holiday weekends. The forest here is old, but not ancient. Much of the surrounding area was logged in the early 20th century, and the current stands are second growth, dense and uniform in age. The terrain is typical of low-elevation Cascade valleys, moist, shaded, quiet. Wildlife is common: black-tailed deer, black bears, raccoons, and a variety of small mammals. The creek supports populations of cutthroat trout and salamanders. The Forest Service maintains the campground from May through September, with a camp host stationed on site during peak season. In the early morning hours of June 9, 2003, a family camping in Site 14 reported hearing footsteps. The family, Mark and Jennifer Holloway, and their 2 teenage children, had arrived the previous afternoon and set up camp without incident. They went to bed around 10:30 p.m. At approximately 4:50 a.m., Mark Holloway woke to the sound of footsteps on gravel. He assumed another camper was walking the loop road, perhaps heading to the restrooms or starting an early hike. The footsteps were distinct, rhythmic, deliberate, the crunch of shoes or boots on gravel. They were moving toward his campsite. Holloway listened for a minute, waiting for the steps to pass. They grew louder, closer. He estimated the source was within 20 feet of his tent, then 15, then 10. The sound was clear, unmistakable. Then it stopped. Not gradually, abruptly, as if the person walking had simply ceased to exist mid-stride. Holloway waited in the dark. No other sounds followed. No voices, no tent zippers, no vehicle doors. He checked his watch, 4:53 a.m. He remained still for several more minutes, then unzipped his tent and looked outside. The campsite was empty. The gravel loop road, visible in the faint pre-dawn light, showed no one. He walked to the road and examined it. No fresh footprints in the thin layer of dust that had settled overnight. No disturbance. He returned to his tent and mentioned the incident to his wife in the morning. She had not heard it. She had been asleep. His children had not heard it either. He dismissed the experience as half-dreaming, a misperception in the space between sleep and waking. 2 nights later, on June 11th, Campers in Site 22, a couple named David and Erica Sorensen, reported an identical experience. They heard footsteps approaching their site at approximately 4:48 a.m. The sound grew louder, closer, then stopped. David Sorensen, an avid outdoorsman with military experience, immediately left his tent to investigate. He found nothing, no person, no tracks. He noted the time and wrote a brief account in a journal he kept during the trip. The camp host that season was a retired teacher named Olivia Kowalski. She had worked at Panther Creek for 3 summers and was familiar with the usual disturbances: raccoons, curious deer, occasionally bears. On the morning of June 12th, Sorensen approached her and described what he and his wife had heard. Kowalski listened but offered no explanation. She noted that she had not heard anything unusual from her own site, which was located near the entrance to the campground. Over the following 2 weeks, 4 more parties reported hearing footsteps in the early morning hours. All described the same characteristics: approaching steps on gravel, steady pace, sound fading at approximately 10 feet from their tents, no visible source. The times varied slightly, between 4:45 and 5:10 a.m., but the pattern was consistent. By late June, Kowalski had logged 6 separate reports. She mentioned them to a Forest Service ranger during a routine visit. The ranger, a woman named Patricia Velasquez, visited the campground on June 27th and spoke with several campers who had reported the phenomenon. Velasquez took statements and examined the areas where the footsteps had been heard. She found no evidence of human activity, no tracks, no disturbances in the gravel. "People hear things in the woods," Velasquez said in an interview conducted for a local newspaper in 2005. "Wind, animals, the creek, they all make sounds that can seem like footsteps, especially if you're half asleep. I didn't think much of it at the time. It seemed like a case of suggestion and imagination." But the reports continued. In July, 3 more parties heard the footsteps. In August, 5. All described the same experience: approaching steps, growing louder, stopping abruptly. Some reported hearing the steps multiple mornings in a row. Others heard them only once. The phenomenon occurred regardless of weather, regardless of occupancy levels in the campground, regardless of which specific site the campers were staying in. In early September, Velasquez returned to the campground with a handheld audio recorder. She spent 2 nights in Site 14, the site where the Holloways had first reported the footsteps. On the morning of September 4th at 4:51 a.m., the footsteps began. Velasquez was awake, sitting outside her tent. She heard them clearly, steady, rhythmic, approaching from the direction of the Loop Road. She activated the recorder and oriented herself toward the sound. The steps grew louder. She estimated they were within 15 feet. Then 10. Then they stopped. She walked toward the road. Nothing. She inspected the gravel. No prints. She reviewed the audio recording later that morning. The footsteps were clearly audible, captured with reasonable fidelity despite the ambient noise of the creek. The recording showed no fade-out, no gradual diminishment. The steps were present, then absent. The transition was instantaneous. Velasquez submitted the recording to the district office along with a summary of the reports. The recording was reviewed by a supervisor, District Ranger Alan Toraldson, who listened to it multiple times and consulted with a wildlife biologist to rule out animal activity. The biologist, Dr. Meredith Kwan, concluded that the sound was consistent with bipedal footsteps, human or human-like, in cadence and weight distribution. "It's not a bear," Kwan said in a memo dated September 15th. "Bears don't walk with that regularity, and it's not deer. The sound is too heavy, too deliberate." The Forest Service did not issue a public statement. Internally, the phenomenon was noted as unexplained auditory event and filed. Torvaldsen recommended continued monitoring but no further investigation. No warnings were posted. The campground remained open. In 2004, a group of audio engineers from Evergreen State College visited Panther Creek as part of a project on environmental sound recording. They set up multiple recording stations throughout the campground and captured audio continuously for 5 nights. On the morning of July 3rd, 3 of the recording stations captured the footsteps simultaneously. The timestamps showed the sound moving through the campground in a logical progression, starting near the entrance, moving through the first loop, then the second, as if someone were walking the entire circuit. But no visual confirmation was obtained. No person was seen. The engineers analyzed the recordings using spectral analysis and identified the frequency profile consistent with human footsteps on gravel. They ruled out echoes, reflections, and environmental interference. "The sound is real," wrote lead engineer Simon Durant in a project report submitted to the college in August. "It's not a recording artifact. It's not an illusion. Something is producing that sound, but we couldn't identify a source." The Forest Service was notified of the findings. A representative from the regional office reviewed the report but declined to pursue further investigation. A memo dated October 2004 stated, "Acoustic phenomenon documented but unexplained. No evidence of public safety risk. Recommend standard operational procedures." Campers continued to report the footsteps throughout the 2000s. Online reviews of the campground occasionally mention strange sounds in the early morning or footsteps that don't make sense. Most reviews describe the campground as peaceful and well-maintained. The footsteps are treated as a curiosity, something unusual but not threatening. In 2012, a documentary filmmaker named Gabriela Reyes spent a week at Panther Creek, attempting to capture the phenomenon on video. She set up infrared cameras, motion sensors, and multiple audio recorders. She heard the footsteps on 3 separate mornings. Her cameras captured nothing. Her motion sensors did not trigger. Her audio recorders confirmed the sound. "I heard it with my own ears," Reyes said in a podcast interview in 2014. "I was completely awake. It was 5 a.m., still dark, and I heard footsteps coming toward me. They were 20 feet away, then 15, then 10, and then they stopped. I stood there for 5 minutes, waiting. Nothing. No one. And when I checked the cameras later, there was nothing on the footage, just me standing alone." The Forest Service has not updated its position. The campground operates as it always has. Rangers acknowledge the reports when asked, but offer no explanation. The footsteps continue to be heard, primarily between late May and early September, always in the hour before dawn. And each morning, when the sound fades at the edge of perception, close enough to feel like an arrival, but never arriving, the gravel remains undisturbed, the forest holds its silence, and the only evidence is the memory of something that walked toward the light but chose or was unable to step into it. Some transmissions should not be possible with human vocal anatomy. Quartz Creek flows through a remote section of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, draining the western slopes of a ridge that separates 2 river valleys. The area is characterized by dense mixed conifer forest, steep terrain, and limited access. Only a single forest road reaches within 2 miles of the creek, and that road is gated and restricted to Forest Service vehicles. The nearest staffed ranger station is 14 miles away at Randall. Radio communication in the area has always been problematic due to the topography. Ridges block signals, and repeater towers serve the region inconsistently. The Forest Service uses VHF frequencies for ranger-to-ranger communication, with each district assigned specific channels. The Quartz Creek area falls under the jurisdiction of the Cowlitz Valley Ranger District, which operates on frequency 154.350 MHz. This frequency is used exclusively by Forest Service personnel, rangers, trail crews, fire lookouts, and seasonal staff. It is not a public channel. Civilian radios are not authorized to transmit on it, and monitoring requires specific equipment tuned to Forest Service bands. On the afternoon of July 27, 2010, Ranger Michael Yamaguchi was patrolling a trail near Quartz Creek when his portable radio emitted a transmission. The voice was human, male, speaking words that sounded like language but were incomprehensible. Yamaguchi listened for approximately 10 seconds before the transmission ended. He attempted to respond, asking for identification and clarification, but received no reply. Yamaguchi noted the incident in his log, but did not report it immediately. He assumed the transmission had been garbled by interference or had originated from a distant station bleeding onto the frequency. Such occurrences, while uncommon, were not unheard of in areas with challenging radio conditions. 3 days later, on July 30th, Ranger Diane Kowalczyk was working in the same area and heard a similar transmission. She described it as a voice speaking backward, not like a recording played in reverse, but like someone trying to talk while reversing the sounds. She recorded a brief audio sample using her phone, holding it near the radio speaker. The transmission lasted roughly 15 seconds. Kowalczyk reported the incident to District Supervisor Leonard Briggs, who listened to the recording and agreed that the transmission was unusual. Briggs requested that rangers in the area document any further occurrences and attempt to determine the source. Over the following month, similar transmissions were reported 6 more times, all near Quartz Creek, all on the Forest Service frequency. Rangers began carrying audio recorders during patrols. On August 19th, Ranger Thomas O'Malley captured a 30-second transmission on a digital recorder. The audio was clear and undistorted. A human, voice, male, steady tone, speaking in what sounded like reversed phonemes. The cadence suggested intentional speech, not random vocalization, but the words, if they were words, were incomprehensible. Briggs forwarded the recording to the regional office in Portland. A communications technician, Gregory Vasquez, reviewed it and confirmed that the transmission was occurring on the correct frequency, but could not identify the source. He suggested that the signal might be originating from malfunctioning equipment or an unauthorized transmitter. He recommended a field investigation to locate the source using directional antennas. In September, a 2-person team, Vasquez and Forest Service radio specialist Laura Pedersen, visited the Quartz Creek area with direction-finding equipment. They spent 3 days attempting to triangulate the source of the transmissions. On September 9th, they successfully recorded a transmission while simultaneously tracking its direction. The signal appeared to originate from a point approximately 1 mile northwest of the creek, in an area of dense forest with no roads or structures. Vasquez and Pedersen hiked to the location. They found nothing, no equipment, no antennas, no signs of human presence. The forest was undisturbed. They set up monitoring equipment at the site and waited for another transmission. None occurred during their visit. The recordings were sent to a linguist at Portland State University, Dr. Amara Okonkwo, who specialized in phonetics and speech pathology. Okonkwo analyzed the audio in October and provided a written assessment. Her findings were unsettling. The speaker is producing phonemes in reverse order, Okonkwo wrote. This is not a recording played backward. The voice characteristics, pitch, timbre, vocal strain, are consistent with forward speech. But the phonetic sequence is reversed. To do this, a speaker would need to plan the entire utterance in advance, reverse the order of sounds in their mind, and then articulate each sound backward while maintaining natural vocal quality. This is theoretically possible for very short utterances with extensive practice, but the recordings show sustained speech lasting 20 to 30 seconds. No trained speaker could maintain this without audible strain or error. Yet, the recordings show fluid, effortless production. Okonkwo attempted to reverse the audio digitally, hypothesizing that playing the reversed speech forward might reveal the original message. The result was unintelligible. The reversed audio did not produce coherent speech. It produced distorted, garbled sounds that resembled no known language. If this were simply reversed speech, Okonkwo explained in a follow-up interview, reversing it again would give us the original message. But it doesn't. What we have is speech that sounds reversed but isn't reversible. It's phonetically backwards but semantically empty. I don't have an explanation. The Forest Service continued to monitor the frequency. Transmissions occurred sporadically, sometimes weekly, sometimes not for a month. No pattern was discernible. The transmissions occurred at various times of day and night. Weather did not seem to be a factor. Attempts to respond or interact with the transmissions were unsuccessful. The voice never replied. In 2011, a second linguist, Dr. Raymond Holbrook from the University of Washington, reviewed the recordings at the request of the Forest Service. Holbrook specialized in speech production and had conducted research on vocal tract mechanics. His analysis, completed in March, corroborated Okonkwo's findings. The vocal folds, tongue, and articulators are producing sounds in a sequence that is physiologically reversed, Holbrook wrote. This requires an extraordinary level of motor control, planning and executing articulation in reverse while maintaining the acoustic properties of forward speech. I've worked with trained phoneticians who can reverse short phrases with practice, but these recordings show long, continuous utterances with no errors, no hesitations, no self-corrections. It's beyond what I would consider humanly achievable. Holbrook also noted that the voice exhibited no electronic artifacts, no indication of digital manipulation, no compression artifacts, no signs of processing. If this is a hoax, he said, it's an extraordinarily sophisticated one, and I can't identify a motive. The transmissions occur in a remote area on a restricted frequency with no audience except Forest Service personnel. Why would someone go to such lengths? In 2013, the Forest Service installed a permanent monitoring station near Quartz Creek, a solar-powered receiver that continuously recorded all activity on the frequency and uploaded data to a remote server. The station operated for 18 months. During that period, it captured 14 transmissions. All showed the same characteristics: reversed phonetic structure, male voice, no identifiable source. A federal investigation was initiated in 2014 after concerns were raised about potential unauthorized use of government radio frequencies. The Federal Communications Commission sent a field agent, David Tekulve, to investigate. Tekulve spent a week in the area conducting signal sweeps and inspecting equipment. He found no unauthorized transmitters, no evidence of tampering, no technical violations. The transmissions are occurring, Tekulve said in his report, dated August 2014, but I cannot identify the source. The signal characteristics are consistent with a standard VHF handheld radio, but there's no physical device that we can locate. The direction-finding attempts have been inconclusive. The signal appears to come from an area of forest where nothing exists. The FCC closed the investigation without resolution. The case was noted as unexplained interference and archived. The Forest Service has not restricted access to the Quartz Creek area. Rangers continue to use the frequency. The transmissions continue to occur. No additional analysis has been conducted. The recordings remain in Forest Service archives, available upon request but rarely reviewed. As of this writing, the phenomenon persists. A transmission was logged as recently as June of 2024. The voice remains the same, calm, measured, speaking in phonemes that run backward while sounding forward, articulating the impossible with the ease of someone reciting a familiar text. And somewhere in the forest near Quartz Creek, on a frequency reserved for emergencies and coordination, a voice continues to broadcast, speaking in a direction human anatomy should not allow, saying words that might be language or might be nothing at all, heard by those who carry radios but understood by no one. Some shadows exist without objects to cast them. McClellan Meadows lies in the north-central section of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, a broad alpine clearing at 4,200 feet, surrounded by subalpine fir and mountain hemlock. The meadow itself spans roughly 80 acres, characterized by seasonal grasses, low shrubs, and scattered wildflowers that bloom from late June through August. The area is accessible via a moderately difficult trail from Forest Road 23, a route used primarily by backpackers and hunters. The meadow has no permanent structures, no historical significance, and sees minimal human traffic outside peak hiking season. The Forest Service maintains the trail but conducts no regular management activities in the meadow itself. Geologically, the area is unremarkable. The meadow occupies a shallow basin formed by glacial activity during the Pleistocene epoch, with bedrock consisting of andesite and basalt typical of the Cascade volcanic arc. Soil depth is shallow, 18 to 24 inches over fractured bedrock, and drainage is good, preventing the formation of wetlands or standing water. The site has been surveyed multiple times since the 1960s, most recently in 2008 as part of a vegetation study. None of these surveys noted any unusual features. In August of 2015, the Forest Service contracted an aerial survey company, Northwest Geospatial Solutions, to conduct high-resolution photography of the Gifford Pinchot backcountry. The project aimed to update trail maps, assess forest health, and document changes in vegetation patterns. The survey utilized a fixed-wing aircraft equipped with a digital camera capable of capturing images at 1-foot resolution. Flights were conducted on August 7th and 8th, both clear days with minimal cloud cover. The photographs were processed in late August by a GIS technician named Amelia Borges. While reviewing imagery of the McClellan Meadows area, Borges noticed a pattern in one of the frames, a series of dark lines forming a regular grid across the meadow's surface. The lines were faint but distinct, visible as shadows, approximately 6 to 8 inches wide. They formed a geometric pattern, parallel lines running north-south, intersected by perpendicular lines running east-west, creating a grid of rectangles measuring roughly 12 feet by 15 feet. Borges assumed the pattern was caused by surface features, perhaps old fence lines, trails, or drainage channels. She flagged the image for review by a supervisor, project manager, Derek Haas. Haas examined the photograph and agreed the pattern was unusual but likely explained by ground conditions. He requested a comparison with earlier aerial imagery to determine if the pattern had been present in previous years. Borges pulled archival photographs from 2008, 2003, and 1997. None showed the grid pattern. The meadow appeared uniform in all earlier images, with no visible lines or geometric features. Haas contacted the Forest Service on September 3rd and reported the finding. A district ecologist, Dr. Sandra Yates, reviewed the imagery and agreed to conduct a ground survey. Yates visited McClellan Meadows on September 11th with a field assistant, Marcus Delgado. They carried GPS units, cameras, and measuring equipment. On the ground, the meadow appeared normal. Yates and Delgado walked a systematic grid pattern, examining the surface for depressions, vegetation changes, or any feature that might cast shadows visible from the air. They found nothing. The grass and low shrubs were uniform. No trails, no disturbances, no structures. The soil surface was level with only minor undulations typical of natural terrain. Yates marked several GPS coordinates corresponding to locations where the shadow lines appeared in the aerial photograph. She and Delgado took ground-level photographs from these points. The photographs showed unremarkable meadow vegetation, no shadows, no lines. They returned to the district office and compared the ground photographs to the aerial image. The discrepancy was clear. From the air, the grid was visible. On the ground, it was not. Yates requested a second aerial survey. Northwest Geospatial conducted a follow-up flight on September 28th, this time at a lower altitude with higher resolution. The grid pattern was still present. The shadows appeared in the same locations, forming the same geometric configuration. Haas analyzed the images using photogrammetry software to measure shadow angles and lengths. His findings, documented in a report dated October 9th, showed that the shadows were oriented at approximately 45 degrees from north-south, consistent with sunlight from the southeast. However, the sun's position during the August 7th flight had been nearly overhead, approximately 70 degrees above the horizon. Shadows cast by surface objects at that time should have been short and directly beneath the objects. The shadows in the photograph were long, angled, and inconsistent with the sun's actual position. Haas conducted a comparative analysis using photographs from the September flight, when the sun's angle was lower, approximately 50 degrees above the horizon. The shadows in the September images were identical in length and orientation to those in the August images, despite the 30-degree difference in sun position. The shadows don't change with the sun, Haas noted in his report. They appear at the same angle regardless of time of day or solar elevation. This is inconsistent with any known shadow casting mechanism. Dr. Yates contacted a geophysicist at the University of Washington, Dr. Leonard Strand, and requested his assessment. Strand reviewed the imagery and visited McClellan Meadows on October 17th. He brought ground-penetrating radar equipment to scan for subsurface features, buried structures, voids, or density anomalies that might influence surface appearance. The radar survey revealed nothing unusual. Bedrock depth was consistent across the surveyed area. No voids, no buried objects. Soil composition was uniform. Strand conducted a magnetometer survey to check for magnetic anomalies. The readings were normal, showing only minor variations typical of volcanic rock. "There's nothing under the surface that could explain this," Strand said in a recorded interview conducted in November. "No buried walls, no foundation remnants, no geological formations that would create a surface pattern, and even if there were, they wouldn't cast shadows. Shadows require objects above the surface, blocking light. These shadows exist without a source." Strand proposed that the pattern might be an artifact of the photographic process, a lens distortion, digital processing error, or reflectance anomaly. He contacted Haas and requested the original raw image files and camera metadata. Haas provided them. Strand analyzed the files with imaging software and found no signs of manipulation, compression artifacts, or processing errors. The shadows were present in the original data captured by the camera sensor. The Forest Service submitted the findings to the regional office in Portland in December. A summary report was prepared and distributed to relevant departments. The report concluded, "Geometric shadow pattern observed in aerial imagery of McClellan Meadows. Ground surveys and subsurface investigations reveal no corresponding surface or subsurface features. Phenomenon unexplained. Recommend continued monitoring. No media coverage followed. The report was filed internally. No public statements were issued." In 2016, a third aerial survey was conducted as part of routine forest monitoring. The grid pattern was still visible. The shadows maintained the same configuration, same orientation, same dimensions. Haas compared the new images to those from 2015. The pattern had not changed. A graduate student in remote sensing at Oregon State University, Priya Mehta, learned of the phenomenon through a colleague and requested access to the imagery for a thesis project. The Forest Service granted permission. Meta analyzed the images using advanced spectral analysis techniques, examining reflectance values across multiple wavelengths. Her findings, published in a thesis in 2017, showed that the dark lines in the photographs were not shadows in the conventional sense. Shadows are areas where light is blocked, Meta wrote. They have lower reflectance across all wavelengths. But these lines show selective reflectance reduction. Some wavelengths are diminished, others are not. It's as if the pattern is filtering light rather than blocking it. I don't have a physical explanation for how this could occur naturally. Meta's thesis received limited attention. It was cited in a few academic papers on remote sensing anomalies, but generated no broader interest. In 2019, a forest fire burned approximately 1,200 acres northwest of McClellan Meadows. The fire did not reach the meadow itself, but smoke obscured the area for several days. Post-fire aerial surveys were conducted in September. The grid pattern was still present, unchanged by the fire's proximity. As of this writing, the shadows remain visible in aerial imagery. The most recent photographs, taken in July of 2024, show the same grid configuration that appeared in 2015. The pattern has not expanded, contracted, or shifted. It exists in aerial images and satellite data, but cannot be observed from the ground. The Forest Service maintains the site as part of its standard inventory. No restrictions have been placed on access. The trail to McClellan Meadows remains open. Hikers who visit report nothing unusual. The meadow appears as meadows do: grass, flowers, scattered trees, open sky. But from above, at altitudes where perspective flattens and distance compresses detail into pattern, the grid persists. A geometry of shadows that fall without source, cast by nothing, marking the earth with lines that suggest intention but offer no explanation, a diagram drawn in darkness on a canvas that insists it is blank. Cold is supposed to move, but in one place it simply waits. The Lewis River Trail runs for nearly 30 miles through the southern portion of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, following the course of the Lewis River from its headwaters near Mount Adams downstream to the Lower Falls area. The trail is popular with day hikers and backpackers, well maintained by the Forest Service, and notable for its accessibility, relatively flat, clearly marked, and offering frequent views of the river's cascades and pools. The elevation ranges from 1,200 to 2,500 feet, low enough that the trail remains snow-free for much of the year and sees steady use from April through October. The forest along the trail is mature Douglas fir and western hemlock, with sections of old growth that escaped logging during the early 20th century. The river itself is fed by glacial melt and snowpack, maintaining a consistent flow throughout the year. Water temperatures remain cold, typically between 40 and 50 degrees Fahrenheit, but air temperatures along the trail vary with season and elevation, generally ranging from the low 30s in winter to the mid-70s in summer. In June of 2012, a group of 3 hikers, Rebecca Tully, James Okafor, and Priya Sundaram, were walking the Lewis River Trail on what they later described as a warm, clear afternoon. The temperature at the trailhead had been recorded at 68 degrees. Approximately 4 miles from the trailhead, near a section where the trail runs close to the riverbank, Tully noticed a sudden drop in temperature. She mentioned it to her companions. All 3 felt it. The change was immediate and pronounced, from comfortable warmth to noticeable cold within a few steps. They stopped and walked back. The temperature rose. They walked forward again. It dropped. The transition occurred over a distance of no more than 5 feet. Beyond that point, the cold persisted for approximately 50 feet of trail, then returned to normal just as abruptly. Tully, a nurse with a background in physiology, checked her companions for signs of illness or disorientation. Both were fine. Okafor, an engineer, pulled out a small thermometer he carried in his pack, a digital unit used for checking water temperatures while fishing. He held it at arm's length while standing in the cold section. The display read 47 degrees. He walked 10 feet back up the trail. The display read 66 degrees. The group documented the location using a GPS unit and took photographs. The forest appeared normal. The river flowed as it had elsewhere. No visible mist, no wind, no shaded areas that might account for localized cooling. They continued their hike and reported the observation to a ranger when they returned to the trailhead. The ranger, a seasonal employee named Marcus Delgado, logged the report but did not investigate immediately. Microclimates were common in the Cascades, areas where local topography created unusual temperature or moisture conditions. He assumed the hikers had encountered a cold air drainage zone, a phenomenon where cool air settles in low-lying areas and remains trapped. 2 weeks later, on June 29th, Delgado hiked to the location with a handheld weather station. He confirmed the temperature anomaly. The cold zone was exactly where the hikers had described, 50 feet of trail, where the air temperature was 18 degrees lower than the surrounding area. He measured the boundaries. The transition was sharp. At one point, he held the thermometer probe at chest height and moved it slowly forward. The temperature dropped from 65 degrees to 48 degrees over a span of approximately 18 inches. Delgado returned with a supervisor, District Ranger Diane Kettering, on July 5th. Kettering brought additional equipment, multiple thermometers, an anemometer to measure wind speed, and a hygrometer to check humidity. They spent 2 hours at the site, taking measurements at different heights and positions. The results were consistent. The cold zone was stable, localized, and inexplicable. Wind speed was negligible, less than 2 miles per hour, insufficient to transport cold air from any distant source. Humidity was uniform across the area. No streams or springs entered the trail in that section. The river was no closer there than elsewhere. The forest canopy was no denser. There was no topographic feature, no depression, no overhang that might trap cold air. Kettering reported the findings to the Forest Service Regional Office and requested consultation with a meteorologist. In August, Dr. Harold Yoon, an atmospheric scientist from the University of Washington, visited the site. Yoon conducted a detailed survey using professional-grade instruments, including infrared thermometers and thermal imaging cameras. The thermal imaging revealed the anomaly clearly. The cold zone appeared as a distinct blue band on the display, surrounded by warmer red and orange tones. The boundary was linear and vertical, a wall of cold air that extended from ground level to approximately 8 feet above the trail. Yoon measured temperatures at 1-foot intervals from ground to canopy height. The cold zone was present at all levels, but strongest near the ground. There is no meteorological explanation for this, Yoon said in a recorded interview conducted in September 2012. Cold air is denser than warm air. It sinks and flows downhill. It doesn't just sit in place unless it's being continuously replenished by a cold source. But there's no source here. No ice, no snow, no underground water, no shaded rock face. The air is just cold and it stays cold. Yoon returned in October, November, and January to test whether the anomaly was seasonal. It persisted. In October, when ambient temperatures were in the 50s, the cold zone read in the mid-30s. In November, with ambient temperatures in the low 40s, the zone dropped to the low 20s. In January, during a period when the trail was covered in snow and ambient temperatures were in the high 20s, the zone measured in the single digits. The differential is constant, Yoon noted, approximately 18 to 22 degrees below ambient, year-round. It's as if something is actively cooling the air in that specific location, maintaining a set temperature offset regardless of external conditions. Yoon published a brief paper on the phenomenon in a regional meteorology journal in 2013. The paper described the observations and measurements, but offered no conclusions. "I present this as a documented anomaly," he wrote. "I cannot explain it, and I encourage other researchers to investigate." The Forest Service installed a permanent weather station at the site in March of 2013. The station recorded temperature, humidity, wind speed, and barometric pressure at 5-minute intervals. Data was collected for 2 years. The cold zone remained consistent. The temperature differential never deviated more than 3 degrees from the average of 20 degrees below ambient. Dr. Elena Rasmussen, a geophysicist from Oregon State University, reviewed the data in 2015 and proposed that the anomaly might be related to subsurface geology, perhaps a cavity or fissure, where cold air accumulated and vented to the surface. She conducted a ground-penetrating radar survey in June. The bedrock beneath the trail was solid, with no voids or fractures. Soil depth was consistent with surrounding areas. Rasmussen also tested for radon and other gases that might indicate subsurface venting. Concentrations were normal. "If cold air were rising from below," she explained, "we'd expect to see other indicators, gas emissions, moisture, soil disturbances. There's nothing. The cold air is just there, at surface level, with no apparent source." A second meteorologist, Dr. Francine Allard, from the National Weather Service, visited the site in 2016 at Yoon's invitation. Allard brought a portable LiDAR system to map air currents in 3 dimensions. The scans showed no movement within the cold zone. The air was static. Normally, even in still conditions, air moves. Convection currents, minor turbulence, something, Allard said. Here the air is motionless. It's sitting in place like a solid object. The Forest Service has not restricted access to the trail. No signs warn of the temperature anomaly. Rangers occasionally mention it during safety briefings, noting that hikers should be prepared for sudden temperature changes. The phenomenon is documented in internal reports, but has received no media coverage. Hikers continue to encounter the cold zone. Some find it refreshing on hot days. Others find it unsettling. Online trail reviews occasionally mention a really cold spot near mile 4 or weird temperature drop that doesn't make sense. Most hikers pass through without comment. The weather station was removed in 2018 due to budget constraints, but periodic manual measurements continue. As recently as August 2024, rangers confirmed the anomaly was still present. 50 feet of trail, 18 degrees colder than the surrounding forest. Precise boundaries, no visible cause. And on warm summer afternoons when the forest is still and the river whispers over stone, hikers walk from sunlight into a pocket of air that feels like early winter. A cold that waits in the same place it has always waited, marking a line that should not exist, holding a temperature that has no source, refusing to warm or dissipate or move, as if the forest itself has decided that in this one small space the rules of heat and flow and equilibrium simply do not apply. There is an hour each night that refuses to be documented. Midway Guard Station sits at 3,200 feet in a remote section of Gifford Pinchot National Forest, accessible only by a narrow gravel road that branches off Forest Road 25. The station was built in 1934 by the Civilian Conservation Corps as a fire lookout and ranger outpost. It consists of a single-room cabin with a metal roof, a small porch, and a detached storage shed. The structure is maintained by the Forest Service, but no longer staffed year-round. It serves primarily as a seasonal base for trail crews and researchers working in the surrounding wilderness. The area around the station is heavily forested. Douglas fir, western hemlock, and red cedar dominate the canopy. The understory is dense with ferns, salal, and vine maple. Wildlife is abundant: black-tailed deer, black bears, cougars, coyotes, and a variety of smaller mammals. The Forest Service and state wildlife agencies occasionally deploy trail cameras in the area to monitor animal populations and movement patterns. These cameras are motion-activated, battery-powered units designed to capture photos or video when triggered by movement. They are standard research tools used widely across North America with reliable performance. In October of 2009, a wildlife biologist named Dr. Trevor Ibarra installed 4 trail cameras within a half-mile radius of Midway Guard Station as part of a study on black bear behavior. The cameras were positioned along known game trails, mounted on trees at chest height, and programmed to capture still images whenever motion was detected. Ibarra checked the cameras every 2 weeks, replacing batteries and SD cards as needed. When he reviewed the first batch of images in late October, he noticed an oddity. Each camera showed a consistent gap in its timestamp record. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., no images were captured. Not on any camera, not on any night. Given that the cameras were motion-activated, this would be unremarkable if no animals passed during that hour. But the pattern held across all 4 cameras over multiple nights in a region with high nocturnal wildlife activity. Ibarra assumed the cameras were malfunctioning due to cold temperatures or low batteries. He replaced all 4 units with new cameras from a different manufacturer. The problem persisted. Between 2 and 3 a.m., no images. He checked the camera settings. They were correct. He tested the cameras in his office. They functioned normally, capturing images throughout the night. In November, Ibarra installed 2 additional cameras outside the half-mile radius, approximately 1 mile southeast of the station. These cameras recorded normally, capturing images throughout the night, including the 2 to 3 a.m. window. The cameras near the station continued to show the gap. Ibarra documented the issue in his research notes and mentioned it to a colleague, Dr. Sandra Yates, a Forest Service ecologist based at the Randall office. Yates suggested that electromagnetic interference from the old guard station, possibly residual wiring or metal roofing, might be affecting the cameras. Ibarra thought this unlikely, as the cameras operated on independent battery power and used solid-state memory with no radio transmission. But he agreed to test the hypothesis. In December, he moved 1 camera to a location 200 yards from the station, well outside any potential electromagnetic field. The gap persisted. He moved another camera a quarter-mile away. It recorded normally. He moved it back to within the quarter-mile radius. The gap returned. By January of 2010, Ibarra had tested 9 different cameras, 3 brands, various models, both new and used units. All showed the same pattern when placed within a quarter mile of the guard station. No recordings between 2 and 3 a.m. Outside that radius, all functioned without issue. "I couldn't explain it," Ibarra said in an interview recorded in 2011. "These are simple devices: motion sensor, camera, memory card. There is no reason they should all fail in the exact same way, at the exact same time, every night. And they didn't fail. They just stopped recording for 1 hour. The rest of the night they worked fine." Ibarra contacted the camera manufacturers to report the issue. Technical support representatives suggested various troubleshooting steps: firmware updates, different battery types, alternative mounting positions. None resolved the problem. One representative asked if the cameras were being used near military installations or restricted areas where jamming equipment might be present. Ibarra confirmed they were not. In March of 2010, Yates visited the site with Ibarra and a Forest Service technician named Marcus Delgado. They installed a test array, 6 cameras positioned at varying distances from the guard station, all set to time-lapse mode, capturing an image every 5 minutes, regardless of motion. They left the cameras running for 1 week. When they retrieved the cameras, the results were consistent with Ibarra's earlier findings. Cameras within a quarter mile of the station showed gaps in their timestamp sequences between 2 and 3 a.m. The images would progress normally, 1:55, 200, then jump directly to 3:05, 3:10. The hour between 2 and 3 simply did not appear in the files. Cameras beyond the quarter-mile radius recorded the full sequence without gaps. Delgado examined the SD cards using data recovery software. The missing images were not merely hidden or corrupted. They did not exist. The file numbering sequences skipped those time slots entirely, as if the cameras had never attempted to capture images during that hour. Yates reported the findings to the district office in April. A memo was circulated to regional wildlife managers noting the issue and recommending that researchers avoid placing cameras near Midway Guard Station if continuous nocturnal data was required. The memo did not speculate on the cause. In 2011, a team from the University of Washington's Electrical Engineering Department, led by Dr. Raymond Holbrook, visited the site to investigate potential electromagnetic interference. They brought spectrum analyzers, magnetometers, and RF detectors to measure any unusual signals or fields. They conducted surveys during daylight and overnight, covering the full 24-hour cycle. Their instruments detected no anomalies, no electromagnetic interference, no radio signals, no magnetic field distortions. Background radiation levels were normal. "We found nothing that would interfere with camera operation," Holbrook stated in a report dated June 2011. "The environment from an electromagnetic perspective is completely benign." Holbrook installed his own research-grade camera at the site, a ruggedized unit designed for harsh environments with industrial-grade components. It malfunctioned identically. Between 2 and 3 a.m., no recordings. He retrieved the camera, tested it in his lab, and confirmed it was functioning correctly. He returned it to the site. The gap reappeared. In 2012, the Forest Service attempted to document the phenomenon using non-photographic methods. A wildlife technician, Lucia Fernandez, installed 3 audio recorders near the guard station, programmed to record continuously for 7 days. The recorders operated independently of one another, using different technologies: one digital solid state, one analog tape, one using a laptop with USB microphone. All 3 showed the same issue. Between 2 and 3 a.m., the recordings either stopped entirely, produced corrupted files, or captured only static. The rest of the 24-hour period recorded normally: bird calls, wind, rustling leaves, distant animal sounds. But for 1 hour each night, the audio was absent or unintelligible. Fernandez reviewed the equipment. No mechanical failures, no battery issues. The devices simply failed to capture audio during that specific time window. A Forest Service report dated September 2012 summarized the findings. Multiple recording devices, both visual and audio, consistently failed to document the period between 2 and 3 a.m. when deployed within a quarter-mile radius of Midway Guard Station. Devices function normally outside this area and during all other time periods. Cause unknown. No electromagnetic interference detected. No equipment defects identified. Phenomenon remains unexplained. The report was filed internally. No further investigation was authorized. The Forest Service noted the issue in maintenance logs, but took no action to restrict access or modify operations at the guard station. In 2014, a journalist from a regional outdoor magazine, Elliot Crane, visited the site after hearing about the phenomenon from a Forest Service employee. He installed his own trail camera and spent 2 nights at the guard station. The camera malfunctioned as described. Crane wrote an article about the experience, published in November 2014, but it received minimal attention. Over the following years, sporadic attempts were made by researchers, hobbyists, and curious visitors to document the missing hour. All reported identical results. Cameras placed within the quarter-mile radius failed to record between 2 and 3 a.m. Cameras outside the radius functioned normally. As of this writing, the phenomenon persists. Trail cameras installed near Midway Guard Station continued to show the gap. The Forest Service acknowledges the issue when asked, but offers no explanation. The guard station remains in use. The road remains open. The forest around it remains accessible. And each night, between 2 and 3 a.m., in a quarter-mile circle around a cabin built nearly a century ago, every camera falls silent. The hour passes, motion occurs, animals move, wind blows, branches sway. But no device records it. The images that should exist do not. The files that should form remain absent. And when 3 a.m. arrives, the cameras resume, capturing the forest as it has always been, as if the missing hour never mattered, or as if what happens during that hour was never meant to be seen.